That's the microphone, right? Right, good evening, everybody. 7 o'clock. This is slightly unusual. We're back in this chamber again after such a long time. In 12 years as a council, I've never sat in this chair. I must admit. So welcome and good evening to everybody who's attending tonight as members and our visitors here tonight. So this is the 5th and penultimate overview and scrutiny committee meeting of this municipal year, and ultimately this term, of course. For those of us who may be watching us, I always say this, on the YouTube channel, the millions out there. So my name is Councillor Tej Taylor. I'm the chair of this committee for this meeting tonight. And we are meeting tonight as a Crime and Disorder Committee, which is a statutory panel under the auspices of the overview and scrutiny. This is a hybrid meeting, so there are, and it will take place over Zoom, as I said, broadcast on the council's YouTube channel. And a number of members who are here tonight are attending virtually, and just to confirm the attendance will not be officially recorded as present in the minutes, but it will be noted in the item for apologies and substitutions. So just a bit of housekeeping, mainly for those who are partaking online, is remember neutral backgrounds, please, when you come on screen. And if you do wish to speak when we get to that part of the meeting, but use your chat function. Was it hands up? I can't remember which one it was. Either one, and then we'll keep an eye out throughout the course of the meeting. We'd like you to keep, if you can, your cameras on, but keep your microphones muted unless you're about to speak. As I said earlier, we're meeting tonight in the capacity of the Crime and Disorder Committee, and we only have one substantive item tonight, a very important item, which is the review of the annual report of the Safer Ealing Partnership. I think you've all had your papers online on the council's website, which I hope you've all read. I think it was near 100 pages, I think, on that report. So if anybody else is interested in public members online or whatever, can follow that report as well. So let's get that out of the way. The number of quick items we need to get out of the way. Just ask all the councillors present, just confirm their name, please, for the records. We've got Louise Brett. Present. I did see that. Paul Driscoll. Seema Kumar.
Present online.
Thank you. Councillor Miriam Rice. Sarah Rooney.
Present online.
Okay. Chris Summers. Simon Woodruff. Anthony Young. Present. Councillor John Ball, who's not arrived, but we are expecting him at some point. Councillor Flayblock.
Chair, I think she's just logging in at the moment, so she should be with us very shortly.
All right, no problem.
Faye's on mute, Chair. She's trying to tell you that she's here. She is here, I can see her.
Yes, I am, thank you.
We heard that. Jazz Kiran Chauhan.
Oh, yep, present online.
Praveen Anand. Present. Sitara Anjum. Sitara, you here? Okay, and Dan Crawford, I did hear.
Yeah, I am here, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, lovely. Thanks very much. All right, any declarations of interest to declare? I'm assuming no. There's no urgent matters to discuss tonight. There's no items to be discussed, considered in public, in private rather. All items will be considered in public. One decision I've been asked to make, minutes of the last meeting on the 3rd of February. Are you happy with the accuracy of those minutes? Great, thank you very much. Okay, all right, let's move on to the main item. So members, you'll be provided, I think, with a presentation on the partnerships work, the Safe Healing Partnership work over the course of the last 12 months and the priorities for the next 12 months. You would have read the report, seen the report, which has been circulated in advance of the meeting, that covers the breadth and the range of the services engaged in the partnership. That report fulfills the committee's requirement to annually scrutinise the work of the Safe Healing Partnership. We've got a number of partner members in attendance tonight, and I will list them. We've got Councillor Aisha Raza, who's the Cabinet Member for Tackling Equality. We've got Chief Superintendent Sean Wilson from Metropolitan Police West Area Basic Command Unit, which I'll call for BCU initially. I've got Superintendent Anthony Bennett, also from the BCU. Paul Murphy, who's our Safe Community Operations Manager from Union Council. Maxine Sawford, who's a Violence Reduction Coordinator, actually was here. And Commander Ben Moore, who's from the London Fire Brigade. I should warn, is on call. Just okay. All right. So as noted in the report, the partnership is chaired by a Cabinet Member for Tackling Equality, Councillor Raza, who's going to, I think, introduce the report shortly. And I want to stress up front to all our partners here the valuable work the different agencies do in preventing and tackling both crime and antisocial behaviour where it occurs, and at the local level that councils have positive relationships with the police and different service teams. However, we are here to sense check that level of public confidence in the services in addressing the issues that concern our local residents and communities, and the work to ensure that people at risk don't become victims of crime and don't risk engaging in criminal behaviour. In the report, you would have seen a section outlining some of the challenges and looking forward sections, which may help focus some of our discussion tonight. After the speakers have spoken, members will have an opportunity to ask questions and make recommendations. And I'll try and take the report section by section as we move along. So just a quick note, because I know flagged up earlier, I think if you downloaded the report online, the graphs are a bit blurry. So apologies about that in advance, but I think we can provide updates later on those reports. What I will say, if you don't mind, is what I thought was missing given our equalities form is the lack of demographic information in some of the sections. You know, and hopefully we'll get some of that information in future years, even if it's just a link to some of the data, because I know there's a wealth of data out there, but it wasn't a lot in the report. So that's my first recommendation there. All right, first speaker then, is it Aisha, you speaking up first?
So good evening, everyone. The Safe Healing Partnership is the community sort of safety partnership that we hold here in Ealing. And I'm just going to do that. And as you're aware, the purpose of this partnership is to coordinate and to monitor the combined actions of all the agencies in the borough to tackle both the causes and the impact of crime and antisocial behaviour. As one of the largest populations in London, in all the London boroughs, Ealing has traditionally been sort of quite high volume and moderate rate borough in terms of the notable offences. And in 2021, we ranked 19th based on the total notable offences per resident population. And this is the same sort of position that we held for the year before. The report being presented tonight will take us through the performance data and provide commentary and analysis and case studies on the work and services that across the Safer Ealing Partnership, which we've carried out in the past year. So the report outlines key performance data from the police, focusing on the 5 business areas of the West Area Borough Command Unit and the London Fire Brigade, the council's own sort of Safer Communities team, and outcomes delivered by the wider partners in our relation to the whole borough, as our priorities, such as the safer Ealing for women listening exercise that we had, and we ran and which saw around 4,000 responses from very brave and courageous residents who took part and gave us their information. And we'll hear more about that later in detail. The report also holds a strong and necessary focus on work conducted by the partnership in tackling crime and community safety issues, which are important to Ealing residents, including the sort of violence, particularly affecting young people and against women and girls. It also focuses on crime affecting the vulnerable people and highlights developments in the broader partnership and relationships that are building networks, which are including cross-borough developments that we seek to address wider issues, foster engagement, and truly identify and tackle the root causes that we see of crime and antisocial behaviour. So the SEP works to drive improvement in the public for the public, and welcomes the scrutiny panel tonight as a critical friend, and that enables that voice and the concerns of the public to be heard, acknowledged and acted upon. So in having committees such as these, we want to make sure that we promote the understanding of the partnership and its function that has been carried out over the last year. And from this work, we can sort of help prevent the rise and sort of tackle further issues that might arise in the borough, not just in Ealing, but across London. And the mediation service that also works to offer conflict resolution over intensive sort of interventions by authorities to the integrated youth service, and provides early intervention for our young people in helping them realise their full potential. So we all want to make Ealing a safer and a fairer borough, and one that we can be really proud of. And it's through dialogues such as these that we're having tonight that we can carry on working together in these partnerships and achieve the best Ealing that we possibly can. So thank you very much, and I'll hand over to Paul, who'll take you through the report.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. Obviously, Councillor Raza, thank you very much for the introduction. Councillor Raza chairs the SEP, as you're probably aware, and the list of board members for the SEP includes the Chief Executive of the Council, senior executives from partner agencies, including police, social care, public health, London Fire Brigade, MOPAC and probation services, as well as drug and alcohol intervention services. It also includes representatives from voluntary sector partners, including key partner being West London Equality Centre. So the Police and Justice Act, this is the boring bit, gives councils a function of scrutinising the work over their community safety partnerships, and the Local Government and Public Involvement in Health Act gives you as a scrutiny body a pretty wide remit to examine how partners are carrying out their work. So the report we've put together for you this year follows quite a similar style to the format we sort of developed over the last few years. It's a bit of a development on that. So as always, there's a significant contribution from quite a wide range of partners and services outside the council, as well as from obviously our key blue light partners. This evening, we've got Ben Moore, London Fire Brigade Borough Commander, as well as Sean Wilson and Anthony Bennett from the Met Police, and Maxine Salford, who's coordinated our recent community engagement exercise, which is focused around women's safety. What I would just say is there's a lot of partners who've contributed very significantly to this report who aren't here this evening, but they are listed in the covering report, and we are very grateful to them for the contribution they've made. So we'll be looking at 2021 in particular this evening. That was the middle year of our current 3-year strategy, and our strategy focuses on 4 theme areas, which are preventing exploitation and victimization, tackling drug and alcohol abuse, effective management of spaces, and strengthened information sharing across the partnership. So the report outlines developments in those areas this year. It includes quite a lot of performance data and outcome data. It outlines where the challenges have been and what our response to some of those challenges is going to be moving forward. It takes us through first to the police, who I'll hand over to in a moment. And Sean and Anthony will take us through the work of their 5 business areas, including response, neighbourhoods, local investigations or CID, public protection, which is a safeguarding element, and HQ. And we'll then move to London Fire Brigade. And again, the performance data from them and initiatives that they're undertaking. I was going to say, Chair, I know that in previous years, the way that this has worked is that, for example, once the police have done their initial introduction, we might take questions for the police at that point, let them potentially sit down and then bring the London Fire Brigade in and do questions. Then if that works well, that tends to sometimes flow, but obviously it's entirely up to you and how you want to run things. I'm just thinking in terms of moving around. Sure, no, of course. Oh, okay with that. Thank you. Thank you. Myself and Maxine will then be back to take you through some of the council services and their elements to the report, if that's okay. Now, there's obviously in the report, you'll see safe communities, CCTV, patrol services, male violence against women and girls, crime prevention and reduction, and the community MARIC. Most of that falls directly under my remit, but there's also a lot of information in there from licensing, trading standards, drug and alcohol services, prevent, and youth services. And as always, if there's any graphs or data sets that aren't clear or you'd like to scrutinize closer, or if anything comes out from this evening that you've got further questions on that for whatever reason we can't answer, I'll undertake to take that away and get back to you within a reasonable time frame, a week or two. So if there's any more data you want to look at closer, and that of course could factor into the recommendations. So if it's okay, at this point, Chair, I'll hand over to police colleagues for their section of the report. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think it's fair to say it's been quite a busy year. What I'm not going to do, I'm assuming everyone has read the report as such, so what I'm not going to do is go through page by page of the various reports, but what I'm going to cover is a number of the various things. I'll start with the crime statistics, as where are the crime statistics. Anthony will cover off some of the work, particularly within the neighbourhood strands. And then what I will do, I will take us all through some of the key themes, which I feel is going to have an impact within the partnerships. And then I will, obviously, we will take questions. So let's start with the crime statistics. It's fair to say that for Ealing, our total notifiable offences are down by 7%. I still say over the last year, but I still say that we have come out of the artificial environment that was created by COVID. And for us to have a more accurate reflection, I think we obviously need another year of assessment. One thing I'd be clear about is I think generally we expect the crime trend to start to creep up. One, we're now out of from the last year because obviously we're now out of COVID. Movement is much freer now, and of course we have seen we've seen crime trends which have been changing. Specifically within our offences, offence types. So let's be frank, violent crime by and large is down. If we look at our robbery offences, they're down by 47%. If we look at our general theft offences, they're down by 15%. Our vehicle offences are down by also 17%. However, when we look at our violent crime, it is down. However, our youth violence has crept up. If we look at our sexual offences, very sadly, I'm sad to report, our sexual offences have increased by 27%. That includes rape and other sexual offences. So there's an awful lot of work. If we look at, in terms of the homicides, homicides for the borough are down from the previous year. And of course, our violence with injury offences have remained largely the same. There's been a marginal drop, but I would say they look largely the same. Our violence without injury offences have crept up. So those are statistics, but what is this actually telling us? So when we look at the gang activity, we do see the gang activity, and we are doing a lot of work against the gang activity in the various gangs that operate across not only our borough, but our neighbouring boroughs. I have to say, I consider that the gang activities across our borough is becoming more sophisticated. The gangs that we see, and the most prominent ones that obviously that we are dealing with currently at the moment, are based over in Northolt. But there are other gangs now that have been coming across the border from Brent, and we do know that there has been gang activity coming up from the south, from Hounslow Borough and from Surrey. Be under no illusion that what we're dealing with the gangs is highly coercive, a highly vicious and spiteful environment, and one that is eroding and undermining our communities, and particularly the youngsters and the youth within our communities. If I was my plea to you all, to us all here as a partnership, we must be absolutely clear in our work against the gang activities, the targeting of youngsters, young children, teenagers, bring them into county lines, etc. This is a nationwide problem. Gangs have no boundaries, as we have seen, and this borough is no exception. I could talk for an awful long time, but I won't tonight, and we would be here for most of the evening. Rest assured, though, to finish off on that particular subject, is we're doing an awful lot of work around it. But it is all part of organised criminality, whether it is in sexual exploitation, whether it's money, whether it's drugs, and of course, the movement around of knives and handguns. We are not dealing with people who are simply who is simply just being idle. We're dealing with a very organised group of people. I'll move into burglaries, and I realise that burglary for many of our residents is emotive, it is intrusive, and it is absolutely horrible. Well, our burglary offences, our residential burglaries, are quite significantly down, and we've had a number of successes against putting away a number of burglars. One thing I would say is often our volume burglaries are committed by very few people. And dare I say it, burglars are highly skilled in what they do. For the group, our BRIST team, our burglary robbery investigation teams, to have found this particular individual and this group of individuals, then actually we have done very well. And they've now, that person is going away who was on release from prison. I'll talk about something that's, I think, that we do, another success that we have had, was we had the tragic death of a particular individual who threw himself under a train, a 19-year-old. This person had been exploited and had been sucked into illicit chat. This was part of this activity, was coercion by local gangs. Good work by our proactive teams, located the particular individuals, has charged 5 out of the 6, and have uncovered multitude of offences targeting youngsters across not only this borough, but also other boroughs. I now talk about public protection. I mentioned rape offences and other sexual offences have increased. That is deeply concerning to me. But when I talk about those sexual offences, when we drill down into them, often we talk about what I would call the stranger rapes, in other words, where the assailant is not known, there has been no interaction prior. Those numbers mercifully are few, but are there. Then we talk about someone who's only recently met, and then that relationship has gone too far. But one of the highest proportions of our rapes and sexual offences still remains within the domestic environment, whether it's close family or otherwise. I'm looking at this stage, so we are now enhancing and making sure that we invest heavily in my public protection unit. I'm currently working at putting more assets, more officers and police staff within our public protection unit to try to increase their numbers and increase our resilience. They have been challenged over the years, over the past year, just because of the sheer volume of work that has come in. To understand that to investigate some of these crimes, it is complex, it is lengthy, every single one of those crimes has an intense digital footprint. CPS charging standards, and we work very closely with the CPS. We get the use of specialist caseworkers there, but they have quite exacting requirements, and rightly so, because we absolutely need to ensure we get the conviction in court. Our difficulty, however, I have to be frank, is keeping the victims on board. Much more difficult in the domestic environment, and one of our challenges, the time it is taken to bring the cases to court. The longer it takes to bring the case to court, the greater the likelihood that the victim may decide that they do not wish to continue. All credit to the teams, and we have close family liaison officers who work very closely with those teams in order to prevent that. Offensive weapons. We work very closely as a partnership doing weapon sweeps, and we've had a number of successes in finding a certain number of weapons across not only this borough, but our neighbouring boroughs. What has become clear, and I will talk about stop and search, is it is really important that we retain stop and search as a tool. I'm absolutely mindful, in light of what has happened recently and the recent headlines, that there is a public perception around an adverse public perception around our use of stop and search. Rest assured that in terms of our stop and search data, our recording, we have one of the highest supervision rates, and I intend to ensure that that continues, because one thing I absolutely value is the trust and confidence in our communities in our application of stop and search. If we do not have that, I believe that those who seek to carry weapons and drugs within our communities, that will simply increase and they will become more bolder. However, the assurance I give you that we will continue our scrutiny and ensure that our stop and search is being undertaken in compliance with the law and legislation. The greatest crime at the minute that we're seeing within our communities, I have to be frank, is online crime. It is the highest volume. It is also the ones which is often individuals don't necessarily report it. And one thing that I would ask within your as you make awareness within your constituents is that they are aware of, if you think, of members of our communities are stating that they think they've been victims of online crime, particularly the more vulnerable, then it should be reported, because that way we get a more accurate picture. Online crime manifests itself in many ways, from the scamming and the phishing, which we all now know very well, very sadly, to some form of child sexual exploitation online. And that is horrible. And we work closely with a number of different partnership agencies in order to oust them, to find them, and we do bring them to justice. I will talk about another couple of things before I hand over to Anthony Bennett regarding a couple of things that have been in our news, and I do feel it is worthy of mention to yourself. I'll start with Child Q. And so I'm absolutely clear about this. Central East BCU have apologised publicly to the mother and Child Q. We have to be frank, that search should never have happened. I'm conscious of the fact that that will have a number of implications for policing, not only within London, but also nationally. We are making sure within our own command that all officers are briefed on MTIP searching, which in essence is the more thorough and intrusive part of searching, and the whole issues around use of appropriate adults, etc., and that we're working around policy. There are some elements that are going to be coming out, obviously, with the full report. But be assured that we are working now, making sure that our officers absolutely understand what they can and cannot do, and particularly around proportionality. Trust. We have seen much over the last year, and the Met, a day doesn't seem to go by at the moment when the Met Police is not in the news for often things that, of course, outrage. And I have to be frank, I've been thoroughly disappointed and outraged at some of the things that I have read. We're working very hard now at the moment in order to improve our outreach within our communities. And Anthony will talk a little bit more around this. In addition to that, we've had a a round of not in my met professional standards discussions. Every single officer is being briefed on the command. We have now reached over 90% of our officers. And there are a number of amount of work now that we are doing over the forthcoming period, which are going to continue with that. We have also introduced a number of different measures around how we resolve complaints, and Anthony will cover that off. Violence against women and girls, which I'll ask Anthony to talk through a bit further, but we have undertaken a number of initiatives around that, and I would invite yourselves and certainly the female members to, if you wish to come along and have a look at what we're doing as our local police, you're absolutely more than welcome. I'll talk next through the Commissioner. It is no secret that our Commissioner, Dame Cresta Dick, her last day is Sunday. And I'm very, very sad to see her going. I have to be frank, she's one of the best commissioners in over 30 years of policing that I have worked for and with. And I've worked for her in different guises over the years. And I'm frank, I'm very, very sad to see her go. But the one reassurance that I'm giving you all is that for us, policing this borough, our priorities have not changed and will not change. Deputy Commissioner Steve House will step into the fray as the interim commissioner before the new commissioner is selected, and Helen Ball will step up as the deputy commissioner, who's the current assistant commissioner. My priorities for this for the BCU and for policing of Ealing remain absolutely focused on violence in all of its forms. So that is whether it's domestic abuse, rape and serious sexual offences, robbery, knife-enabled crime, drugs, all forms of assault, all the forms of assault of assaults that emerge out of that. And I say drugs because that is often the precursor to violence, and the organisations that surround that, that perpetrate that, are often involved in violence. But those priorities remain, and I am 100% committed, as is Anthony, that we lead our command to make sure that we keep Ealing as safe as possible. Chair, thank you very much, and I would welcome hand over to Anthony if that's permissible.
Can I just put a question?
Yes.
I'm always quite forgetful of police structure.
Yes.
Does that mean that you're, what's the phrase, top dog in the police in England?
If you want to phrase it like this, so I head up 3 boroughs of Ealing, Hounslow and Hillingdon. I'm based in Ealing, and so this is where I'm based. I'm based over the road in Ealing Police Station until we move to Acton, but my base will always be in Ealing.
All right, because I thought there used to be a borough command.
So we know that's a really good point. So we moved to the BCU model a couple of years ago. I have been a borough commander before out in East London, over in Barking and Dagenham, and then here so I'm now the BCU commander. I can talk very briefly about the BCU model. I know there were a number of questions raised about BCU model and why we have it. Having been a borough commander and now being a BCU commander, I can absolutely say, hand on heart, the borough commander policing from a policing perspective could no longer function. Most of our criminality and what we're dealing with is known by several different boroughs, forces, social services, local authorities. The borough policing model is simply unsustainable. We have the neighbourhood policing, which is the bedrock of all policing. You will have heard that phrase before. We will always have neighbourhood policing teams attached here, and we will always have, each borough will always have its own response team. You will always have your own neighbourhood policing team. But we couldn't run with everything. I was constantly phoning up my counterparts, either in Redbridge or in Havering, asking for assistance, because I was either getting gangs coming in from Essex, organised crime dealing coming from the Thames Valley area, or simply coming out from other parts of London around the North Circular. It was not sustainable, and we would have collapsed. And my only criticism of the BCU model is that we didn't move earlier. And the reason why we didn't move earlier, because we were still recovering from the London Olympics. But, and I'm very happy, if you want a separate session on that, Chair, I'm very happy to go further into the merits and why we are here with the BCU model. Of course, we've got the uplift of 6,000 police officers, of which we're 2/3 of the way through that across London. More officers are coming on. We're taking on extra detective constables or trainee detective constables, and our challenges going forward We have a lot of business change coming in, which will include the increasing policing numbers for the 3 boroughs and including this borough. And of course, we're taking on new software over the summer. This is all across the backdrop of the additionality that is now being provided by Extinction Rebellion and other forms of public protest, which seems to be gathering pace and they're becoming far more efficient and sophisticated. If I could hand over to Superintendent Bennett and he'll take that.
Lovely, thanks for inviting us to this meeting. I'm just going to quickly cover the violence against women and girls work that we're doing and the strategy that sits behind that. Then I'll cover some aspects around what we're doing around stop and search to ensure that we do that in the right way and in a proportionate way. And then I'll move on to some aspects of professional standards, which sort of ties in a little bit around the violence against women and girls piece as well. So in terms of our priorities locally, violence this year has been very much a priority for us, and specifically violence against women and girls as well. We've been doing significant work over the last 12 months around these issues, recognising the impact it has on victims in the local area and MPS wide. So regarding that, there's been a lot of additional investment put into that in terms of resources, in terms of police officer resources and overtime expenditure to make sure that we have people in the right places. And what we've supplemented that with is a violence against women and girls strategic plan. I'll talk through the 5 pillars of our plan, and then I'll talk about some activities that, as I say, sit underneath that. So the first pillar is a presumption that we will seek to prosecute all those who commit acts of violence, threatening or sexually aggressive behaviour towards women and girls, or seek to exploit women and girls. The second pillar is we will work with our partners to safeguard victims, ensuring that we break the cycle of abuse and exploitation by raising awareness both internally and externally. We will do all we can with our partners in the community to create a sense of safety in outdoor open spaces. We will work with our partners to educate boys and young men on the impact of misogynistic behaviour, seeking to break the enduring fear of sexual and physical gender-based violence, and challenging internal negative cultural and behavioural issues and raising awareness. And that touches on some of the professional standards work which we'll do, which I will come on to as well. So in terms of some activity that sits underneath that, I say the most obvious thing you would see on that is our additional patrols that we've been putting out into our hotspot locations across the local authority area. There's been a significant investment put into that, and that's been really driven by our neighbourhood inspectors to make sure we've got the right people in the right places, not just with their own resources, but we've been given additional resources from central London teams, as well as flexing across the different parts of the BCU, again, just to flex where we think that we need that demand in those areas. On top of just the general patrolling activity, some of that has included looking at what initiatives we can do to understand better from the community around the areas where they feel unsafe. So we can focus that patrol work and police work. So some of that's been driven by something we call Street Safe, which has been pushed essentially by the police and MOPAC in the last 6 months particularly, which is an online site where you can actually put in the location where you feel unsafe, why you feel unsafe there, then that comes through to the police, and then we'll work with the local authority partners on those aspects. So it could be things like lighting, litter, or antisocial behaviour in that location. So that's one way we're trying to listen to the community around those locations. That's obviously links in with the survey which the local authority did as well, just to make sure they're complemented and working well together. Another thing, again, to try and understand the issues around particular locations is the walk and talk initiative. So what that is people can contact police to say they feel unsafe in a particular locality, whether that's where they work, live, or socialise. And we'll walk through with them to understand why they feel unsafe. You may have seen some of the reporting on that for International Women's Day. So female officers walking with other females from the general public to listen to their concerns around those specific areas. They've been very productive, those sessions. I went on one with a female officer, and just by being out there, we had someone come up to us to report that they've been victim of a sexual offence. So just being out there, I think that proved, how valuable they can be beyond just identifying, how we can improve those areas to make people feel safe in the local environment. Another initiative we rolled out this year is positive activity initiatives, which have happened here on Ealing, which is where we work with volunteers to put out messaging to help provide reassurance and advice to the local public. Those have gone 4 across Ealing area in the last 3 or 4 months. We've rolled those out and they'll be continuing. So again, it's just really leveraging the volunteer sector to work with us to really increase the and amplify the messages that we want to put out. And as I say, because violence against women and girls is one of our main core areas of focus, that does benefit those issues. In terms of internally around violence against women and girls, we recognise, reflecting the demand which Chief Superintendent's alluded to in his section, we recognised that we needed to make sure that we had the right resourcing to deal with offences as they were coming in, particularly with the demand that we've seen this year. So there's been increases in our Sapphire teams that deal with sexual offences and the team that deal with deal with domestic violence as well. Those have been uplifts of about 6 or 7 officers per one of those areas. So that's been a significant investment. We've also flexed officers from other areas where we've got particular demand, where we need to. So those have been sort of temporary measures, again, just to make sure that we're dealing with those offences in the right way and they're getting the due diligence they deserve. Also, in terms of supervisory levels, within the public protection strand, we've increased by 1 inspector and 1 chief inspector. Again, recognising that we need to make sure that the investigations are handled and dealt with in the right way, and that's added a significant level of supervisory scrutiny across those investigations to try and make sure we get the best outcomes for victims. On top of that, we are working with the CPS around the speed of taking cases through the court as well, because we recognise that is an issue and that is an ongoing piece of work for us as well. So there's quite a lot there going on around the violence against women and girls work with us. We're also obviously engaging with schools around these issues as well, and young people, to try and help define what behaviour is acceptable and what's not acceptable. And that's an ongoing thing for us. We're very much focused heavily on the gang side of things and preventing people from joining gangs and knife crime, and sexual violence. One of those things will gradually increase with those school-age children as well. So that sort of gives you a rundown. There's other things that are going on around violence against women and girls, but I think hopefully that gives you a good overview that we have been very committed to dealing with that this year. In terms of stop and search, to look at how we can do things better, we've got a chief inspector that oversees the stop and search work that we do. And, we recognise that we do need to speak with the community more and listen to the community more about stop and search and identify what their issues are and how they feel during the experience of being stopped by police officers. To that effect, we have introduced this year youth scrutiny panels here on Ealing. It's only recently started in March, so the first sitting has only been in the last few weeks. But that included the Youth Justice Service and police officers, and the next session of that would involve young people from the community as well. So again, that's looking about how we do stop and search, discussing those issues and seeing how we can make improvements by listening to those people that are impacted by that police activity. On top of that, we are doing monthly engagement events as well across Ealing. We did a recent one in Ealing Broadway, where we're out there with a number of other sort of police initiatives, but stop and search is one of those things which we are covering in those sessions in the public domain, where again, we try and speak with people about why we do stop and search, listen to how people feel and think we could improve things. And again, that's just part of our general engagement moving forward. One thing which hasn't taken off in Ealing yet, but we are actively working towards introducing, is the community monitoring groups. I think we had an issue with a chair that we did have who dropped out, unfortunately, and we are working with MOPAC to re-establish that and get that up and running locally. And I've been having conversations this week around that. So again, hopefully in the next 2 months, we should see something land which covers that community monitoring group aspect, and we'll continue to liaise in MOPAC in making sure that is a success. In terms of internally within the police, we recognise that we need to have better scrutiny at supervisory level. And we have in the last 6 months introduced a new supervisory regime. So we are now within the guideline of trying to get all stop and search forms supervised within 72 hours. We're pretty much at 100% of achieving that. But we're actually looking to try and do that within 24 hours. We have a process which we've introduced locally to make sure that happens, and that is being used as best practice across the MPS. So that gives us the opportunity at a very early stage to see what officers are doing and challenge anything which we think is disproportionate, or if we feel things haven't been done in the right way as well. And again, that just feeds into that learning for us and helps us to identify trends at an early stage as well. Section 60 is we are active, obviously, using those in the locality. Again, we think, because we realise that, again, is a big driver of issues around stop and search, and we are looking to see how we can improve that. I think internally, we are looking to also around how we do post Section 60 reviews with the public and partners as well. So I think we recognise that is something maybe missing from what we do around Section 60s, is to understand why, what was the impact of that period where that was in place on the local community. And I think that will help also feed our understanding around the stop and search side of things as well. So I think that'd be a really good improvement on what we're doing now, and helps us to learn again from the public and partners around those issues. As I mentioned before, on the violence against women and girls, and is within the pillars of our strategy, around professional standards, we are actively working locally to make sure that our officers do things in the right way and that they treat everybody with fairness and respect, both internally within the police family, but also externally with the public as well. We've undertaken in the last couple of months a number of briefings. We're on to our second rounds of briefings, where we are briefing every single officer in the BCU about expectations around their behaviour and reminding them what the police oath actually means. They are quite hard hitting the way we're delivering those, and people are being very clear about if they can't behold to those standards, then the expectation is that they should leave the force. And that is being driven centrally and very much locally by ourselves under Chief Superintendent Wilson's direction. On top of that as well, as you would see, we've got the Baroness Casey review, so we'll wait to see what comes out of that as well. But we're not waiting for any recommendations from that. We are moving forward. We have uplifted numbers into our professional standards department centrally. So there's a complaints resolution team which will help provide some consistency and some independence in how internal investigations are managed. And that has been a significant investment again for the MPS, and that will obviously support the BCU in how we deal with officers that come to our attention for complaints and inappropriate behaviour as well. In addition to that, we are making sure that our supervisors are holding regular meetings and briefings with their teams, and making sure that they have that relationship where people feel confident enough to go to them to raise complaints as well. So we work with our supervisors and supporting them in how they manage their teams moving forward, recognising that some people need more support around that than others. Our expectation is that all officers, no matter what rank, challenge inappropriate behaviour where they see it, or report that to a supervisor who then can challenge that behaviour. So we are being very direct around our expectations regarding that as well. Again, just coming back to the violence against women and girls work as well, we do have priority offender units which also are going out there looking to arrest people that are persistent sexual offenders, and also we are using stalking prevention orders, which I think we're the highest in the MPS around the use of stalking prevention orders as well, just to come back to the violence against women and girls piece. So hopefully that sort of gives you an idea around those areas against violence against women and girls, stop and search, and also what we're doing internally around professional standards. Just to finish, sorry, on professional standards, beyond the inappropriate behaviour, we recognise the report which came out a few weeks back around counter-corruption. So we are making sure that we speak to every officer, reminding their responsibilities around declarable associations in terms of any relationships with journalists, people involved in crime, etc., just to make sure that we do accurately record business interests and those issues locally. But also on top of that, there was the issue in that report around property, and we are undertaking work around improving how we deal with property moving forward as well within the station. And we're doing a review as we speak, just to make sure everything is accurately recorded and officers are aware of how they manage property in an appropriate way. I think that's where I finished. Thanks, Chair.
No, thank you, Anthony and Sean. And I feel as though I should have seen a structure chart before I came. Oh, sorry, I insulted you now. Right, both of you covered quite a number of issues, which I suspect may reflect some of the questions that I'd probably like to come. But nevertheless, I mean, still important questions. Hopefully, members will ask them. Lucky for those at home, I mean, it's just to let you know, it's cold in this chamber, by the way. Okay, questions. So I'm going to start with, I'm going to go Councillor Crawford first, because he's on that, sorry.
Chair, I wasn't the first with my hand up. There are other colleagues
I am choosing you first, and Dan.
Okay, Chair. Can I thank our police colleagues for this evening? I know the demands upon the police are particularly severe, and we appreciate them being here to answer questions. I'd like to preface my question with a comment commending the work of the soon-to-be disbanded, unfortunately, Acton Central Safe Neighbourhoods team. I am a councillor for a few more weeks, along with Councillor Rooney, for Acton Central, and they've done phenomenal work in the 12 years that I've been a councillor in Acton Central, and Sergeant Buckland and his small team deserve great credit for what they've done to turn around the policing response in that ward. Can I just speak very broadly, confidence in the Metropolitan Police Service within Ealing? Our police representatives made reference to Cressida Dick and her performance, and I'm not going to comment on that, but I think it's fair to say that there are significant concerns amongst residents of Ealing about how they can have confidence in the Metropolitan Police to police by consent in this country, in both the borough and in our capital city, and how they can have confidence that they will be treated fairly and the right results will be reached. And I'm thinking about any number of incidents over the last 18 months to 2 years. I'm not going to detail them or ask our colleagues to comment on them, because that would be inappropriate. What I'm going to ask is simply, do you feel that residents feeling have confidence in Metropolitan Police at present? If you don't, what will you look to change? And how can we as local councillors help you to ensure that we're all in a better position in a few months' time when we come together again to discuss progress? Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Do you want to take them in threes? Second. Or do you want to answer one by one?
There's quite a bit in one, so if I can take this one first in terms of confidence.
Yeah, I'll get a second question in the meantime. I had John Ball.
Right, thank you. So I've got 3 questions, if that's all right, but 2 of them are very simple. First one is just on the boundary changes. Are the police teams changing immediately on May the 6th, or is there a delay before that happens? And what's the process for handover of the information that the the ward sergeants have on the bits that are moving from one ward to another. The other hopefully simple one, in terms of the people feeling unsafe and the new process that MOPAC's put in place for reporting that, you mentioned lighting was one of the factors. Have you, in some cases, asked the council to stop dimming street lights in particular streets where there's a concern from residents? And then the third thing, which is more a larger issue, is stop and search. I mean, looking at the statistics on page 21, so it's quite stark that in absolute terms, more black people search than Asian or white, and in percentage terms, it's enormously disproportionate. And I mean, so how can you justify that to the Ealing public? You're talking about stop and search being proportionate, but when those basic raw demographic stats are so disproportionate, and also looking at the chart on the other page that the Ealing has more than average number of searches, but below average percentage of positive outcomes. So it's not like this process is working and that can justify. So how can you justify how disproportionate those stats are? Thank you.
Just on that point, is anybody else got a question around stop and search at this point in time? Okay.
Can we take all the stop and search questions together?
I do, Chair. I do.
That was the plan. Go on, Praveen and then Chris. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation, police officers. The concern I have is the residents to keep the confidence when you have section 60 searches, how much is considered reasonable force, and what is the procedure when these people are in a car? How much force can you use, and what is the procedure for when there are women in the cars and there are men police officers? Thank you.
Yeah, I've got about 16 questions, but I'll focus on the stop and search
Stop
one.
and search for now.
Yeah.
That's all right.
And I also should declare an interest, as my girlfriend was on the Ealing Racial Equality Commission, which looked into this issue. And I know that they, as part of that, they went to Uxbridge Police Station and were given a briefing about the stop and search procedures. And it was mentioned in there, apparently, that they're changing the way stop and search is done to remove inherent biases. I mean, I take Councillor Ball's point that, I mean, it seems like 60% of the stop and search are black people, and the percentage of the borough is, I think, less than 10%. So it is completely disproportionate. So when are those changes going to be rolled out to remove those inherent biases?
Sorry, there was one more online. Sorry, Councillor Kamar, this was about stop and search specifically, was it?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
I mean, I have other questions. Stop and search.
Questions later, but don't worry.
Yes. Yeah, no, my main, my question on stop and search is that is it completely essential to have the handcuffs put on first before the search is started? I mean, I was at the operation Ealing Broadway a few days back, and that did not happen. They searched, and then there were some arrests made, and then the handcuffs went on, because there have been instances where people have been stopped and found nothing on them, but they were handcuffed immediately before doing anything. And that is a concern that many people have raised. Thanks.
Thank you. So if we start with the confidence, the question around confidence, I stop and search is a huge subject, and Anthony and I will cover that together, I think. So if we start with the confidence piece, It is a very difficult statistics if we're going to say to all Ealing residents, in terms of police confidence. There was, as I understand, a survey done, a London survey done, which talked about confidence. I think it was about 79% did have confidence in policing. That was a discrete survey done, which was as reported in the media. However, I realise that events will have certainly impacted adversely on public confidence. And for me, it is absolutely vital that we have that confidence. So we are looking at, there is the Met Rebuilding Trust Programme, and we're doing an awful lot of work around the Rebuilding Trust, both internally, and we're making more efforts, and we'll be getting out much more, both formally and informally, into our communities in order to break down some of those bridges and also to address some of those perceptions. Do I need your help on this? Yes, of course I do. And in terms of that community engagement, I will need your help. And the format of that, I won't necessarily go into specifics now, but we do have officers who are working on what that looks like as we go into the summer. The summer is going to be challenging. I agree. We have obviously we have seen a number of very adverse headlines that we have seen, which will erode trust. And I have no doubt with the level of protest that is coming up over the summer, that level of media scrutiny will continue. So I do need your help. And I'd be grateful, but in terms of the formats and how we will do that, I'm happy, no doubt we will approach it separately or as a group over the coming months. The boundary changes, I will hand to Anthony on the boundary changes and the street lighting. I think you're closer to the detail than I am, Anthony.
Yeah, in terms of the boundary changes, we are still working through that with the MPS centrally around what that means for all BCUs across the MPS. So we are looking at what that means for resourcing as we speak. And we'll obviously communicate that when we get the final decisions relating to those changes. And what the resourcing changes to reflect the boundary changes will be almost the easy part. There is a harder part around how we change our IT systems to reflect those changes, to make sure that we can assess the issues locally in the best way, but we will work around that until those changes are made. But obviously the handovers, we will try and keep as much consistency as we can in terms of sergeants and PCs across those areas. For a number of areas, it'll be very consistent process and a smooth process. We recognise from others, particularly where new wards are being created, there'll be obviously more significant change. One thing we can promise you around that is we are committed to ensuring that the level of service that you receive from the officers and West Area BCU will remain as high as we can deliver, and you should not see any drop in performance or how your issues in your locality are dealt with. But we will update you obviously in due course when we get confirmation as to how we're looking at those changes. Sorry.
Come in, sorry, just quickly on that last point, because I'm in East Acton ward. I met two of the officers by chance yesterday, but I've been copied into emails about a ward panel meeting. It'll be happening soon. The problem we've got is we've got boundary changes all over the borough, so we don't know which ones, residents don't know quite which ward they're going to be in at that point as well. So priorities for one ward might not be the same priorities for another ward, So I'm not saying the wall panel shouldn't happen at that time, but I'm just wondering what's the communication method around that.
As soon as we get firm direction, then we'll obviously look at an engagement plan around that to inform communities and those that are part of wall panels as well. If there is a community issue which we think needs dealing with, and before we make those changes, then I would expect the teams to still hold meetings to drive those and address those issues. But as I say, we will be communicating those as widely as possible via the IAG chairs and via the hopefully supported by local authority as well in terms of what our plans are. So on the issue of street lights, I'm not aware that we've asked for any lights to be taken down. So that is something I'm not aware of. But if there are any specific examples, if you want to supply me with those, then we can obviously look into that. But as far as I'm aware, we haven't asked for any streetlights to be taken away.
You're not is this your election, John? It's something that's been raised.
Yeah, I'm not aware that we've asked for any lights to be dimmed, and you know, if we have, okay. I don't know whether the local authorities had any requests. I'm not aware of any requests to come in of that nature where we've specifically asked for lights to be increased in their luminescence.
I can follow that up for you, Councillor. I don't think our team has received any requests like that from police, but that's not to say highways won't have done. So I'll definitely follow it up my side.
Yeah, I think that sounds like it. Individual cases, which in fairness, I don't think either Anthony or I can comment on that. Let's move on to the subject of stop and search. And there are a number of questions. I'm sure there are going to be even more questions coming out of this. So let's start with the area of disproportionality. So I take the perception of disproportionality very seriously. And I have seen the statistics. However, I also know that we scrutinise our stop and search. But if there are issues, and we are looking at stop and search, we've now got Pally Gruel, who's my acting chief inspector. So I've got a dedicated member of my senior leadership team who is looking closely at stop and search around this proportionality, revised guidelines, how the application of it, how the tasking and coordinating is going on that leads ultimately to a stop and search being carried out. No officer can carry out stop and search without having reasonable grounds. Certainly under Section 1 of PACE. We will look at the disproportionality. To comment on every individual case is certainly, I'm not cited on that detail now, but the figures, I do note the figures. I'll move on to Section 60. We don't bring in Section 60 lightly. It has to go through a whole authority process before we do. And the most recent Section 60 was the other night, of course, following a weapon discharge, and also there was a knife used as well, and we had a stabbing also the other night. Section 60 is an immediate tool which we have to use to flood an area in order to disperse violence. If we did not have that and have that tool, then we would it would severely undermine our ability to tackle violence. But I realise that this is a tool that we do not use or authorise lightly. In terms of reasonable force, yes, of course. Officers are now equipped with body-worn video cameras, and they are filmed. They film, and that encounter is filmed and has to be. And officers are held to account on their use or absence of use, departure from use of the body-worn video camera. One of you has mentioned females in cars. I don't know if there is a specific case that comes to mind on that one, but Section 60 will apply into a defined area. It doesn't matter what the, in essence, where the ethnicity is. It is where there has been unlawful violence or the propensity for violence is believed to be about to occur. And that is why we use it. So whether it is in cars or on foot, if they need a Section 60 to go in for whatever reason, it may well be the occupants of that car are the potential perpetrators or have perpetrated that violence. So I note the concerns around the stop and search and the numbers around stop and search and the volume. That is a very blanket answer to around stop and search. There's a lot of work going on at the moment, particularly in obviously light of child Q in terms of how we apply search as well. Thank you.
Just around proportionality as well, I think we recognise that one way of addressing that, and it's mostly as a medium term activity, really, is trying to increase how the local policing community reflects the community it serves, which is obviously getting more people from underrepresented groups into the police force. We do have an outreach programme running, which was launched last year. We are doing very well as a BCU in comparison to other areas around attracting people from underrepresented groups to apply to be in the police. That is obviously challenged by some of the incidents which we've seen recently. But, you know, that is an ongoing thing where we're going into the local community areas, including religious establishments across Ealing, trying to encourage people to join the police. You know, and I think in terms of addressing disproportionality in the medium term, that is a really key thing for us as well, as long as the other measures which I mentioned around increasing engagement where we can discuss those matters as well. In terms of the issues around a new way of doing stop and search, we did introduce training last year where we were utilising some behavioural detection type processes, which was trying to help officers be more aware of what to look out for in terms of if they're speaking to someone, any sort of things like nervous behaviour, which actually would increase our ability to identify people that should be stop and searched and just make sure we ask the right questions. So that is something which was conducted last year by one of our superintendents on the West area. And I know there's a question on handcuffing. Obviously all officers have to make a risk assessment when they do a stop. If they think the person is being violent or has potential to be violent, then, you know, in order to do the search, they will make decisions about whether handcuffs should be used or shouldn't be used. And that is a tactic which, you know, has to be done for their own personal safety, but is not, you know, a default activity, a default use of force that we use for all stop and searches.
I would add that I'm very happy that we invite some of you along to observe officers, and if we do have a section 60 in place for whatever reason, I'm happy that we have members of the community to come along and observe our application of it. If we have an operation going on for anything particularly going on that we feel that will then result in stop and search, the application of section 1 PACE, then I'm very happy. We're very happy to invite members, youths, teenage members of our communities or yourselves along to observe. And, you know, and obviously comment, and we would certainly take, you know, welcome any observations. Thank you.
For that, have we got any further questions on those areas? Yeah, Praveen.
Yes, just
sorry,
to...
before you, sorry, before you, I've got Councillor mentioned she had a question about representation. Oh, yeah, Councillor Chohan, sorry, she's online.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to have a quick follow-up question from the last response that was given by the officer in relation to representation within the police force. I wonder if you could possibly sort of expand on that a little bit more to just tell us what that change has looked like over the years, which particular ethnic sort of demographics are most and least represented, let's say, within the police force, and how that's changing, what obstacles you guys have faced. You already mentioned some of that being, you know, recent issues, but a little bit more on that would be really helpful. And I think just a bit more reflection on what the internal processes are like in terms of tackling structural racism and, you know, biases within the workforce as well. I just wondered, locker room talk and things like that. How are the processes internally to sort of tackle that? Because I think that those areas all sort of build up with something that that Chris mentioned very shortly was about, you know, sort of inherent practices. And I think those things that build up over time in workplaces, and just like to know a little bit more about how you go about tackling and dealing with that, I think.
Yeah, I covered some of that in the professional standards piece, but in terms of groups which we're particularly looking to encourage, there was a focus. The outreach programme, whilst it's looking at all underrepresented groups, is very much focused on, has been on Black communities and attracting female officers as well into the police. Whilst there have been increases over the years in underrepresented communities joining the police, it's just not been at the speed which I think, you know 20 years ago we envisaged it would be. So we are lagging behind what targets were set, years ago in relation to that. So the outreach programme is very much geared towards accelerating that. I can't give you specifics around different ethnic groups here, and maybe that's something we can look at outside the meeting in terms of providing. But very much that has been the focus over the last year around Black communities coming into the police. This is MPS wide. Saying that, we've got a very good representation of officers that are local, from, for example, the Sikh community. So Paddy Gruel, who we spoke about, that's leading the stop and search work, he is from the Sikh community. And, we'll continue to speak to those officers about their experiences in the police force to make sure, they're being supported, or we identify issues where we can. But the Not in My Met work, which Chief Superintendent Wilson talked about, is very much focused around professional standards and changing the culture where we think there's issues within the NPS. So that has been very direct around, hence why we're encouraging people to challenge inappropriate behaviour. For supervisors, we have had inclusivity training last year as well. So that was over a number of sessions where officers at all supervisory ranks have been asked to do inclusivity training, and that is just to try and get them to see, what the expectations are around behaviour and how they can play their part in making cultural change within the NPS. We do have a STRIDE plan, which is around how we approach diversity and inclusion issues. That plan includes internal work, and some of that is around doing surveys around how people feel, so we can understand where the problems are and what they think would actually help address the issues which they raise. But also that looks externally as well around STRIDE. So one of the elements of that is that everyone's a recruitment sergeant, as we call it. So again, that's going out into the community. And so, a response officer to people at my level are going out there and trying to encourage people to, again, be part of the police force, either by joining the police or as volunteers or special constables. There's a number of different ways people can work with the police. We recognise cultural change, and I recognise there's disappointment in that, because after this Stephen Lawrence report, I think, we would have liked to see a lot more progress since that time. But, we recognise we are behind the curve, but, we are trying very hard now to accelerate that change. But it's not something which is going to change immediately over the next 2-3 weeks. We are looking at obviously a longer-term period regarding that.
Can I just quickly follow up? So, Anthony, sorry. Because obviously the Macpherson report goes back nearly over 20 years. While there won't be immediate change, we'd expect to see something over the next 5 years, I'd imagine, or at least 10 years in one sense. But the other thing I wanted to ask was, because we did have a previous meeting of overview looking at qualities within the council itself as well. And I just wondered, you may not have the data now, so I'm not asking for it, but what's the proportion of people apply from particular communities and how many get appointed to roles in the police service? Is there a gap there, or in terms of who does get taken on?
Good question. And the answer is, it's the recruitment process is done centrally. There is, now I'm not going to comment on the recruitment process because it is not a process that I can have any control or full knowledge, statistical knowledge over. I know this question has been asked a number of times, and it may well be that either we agree to feed this back into you, or we put it, or put it part of a Freedom of Information Act request. But what I can say is that over the years, and I've been in the Met all my career, it is a very different service to when I joined in 1991. In short, it is far more diverse now. And let us be frank, across each of our boroughs and across London, there are over 200 different native languages spoken. So it can be, it can be a challenge, but I can absolutely say, hand on heart, when I look around my own offices now, over here at Ealing and across the other 3 boroughs, it is a far more diverse workforce than at any time. And that is not only represented at police constable ranks, but also sergeant, inspector and chief inspector ranks. And I'm very proud of that. And I'm very proud of what they achieve and what they deliver. Thank you.
Moving on to a different subject, I got questions about 2 different aspects. I probably should explain that my day job as a journalist and cover a lot of court cases. And actually this afternoon I was in court when the CCTV footage was played of Sabina Nessa being attacked and ultimately killed. And it was absolutely horrific. And I just wondered, you know, it's obviously a fine line between safety advice for women and victim blaming. What advice would you have for women who, you know, want to live their normal lives, go out in evenings, etc.? You know, in this case, you know, she was walking on her own. It happened to be after dark, through a park to get to a bar. You know, there's lots of parks, lots of bars in this borough. Do you have any advice for women, and why is it that, you know, 50 years after the Yorkshire Ripper, women are still not safe, you know, to walk alone in the evening? And the second question is on about a totally different issue. You mentioned gangs. I represent Northolt. You didn't name them specifically, but we're talking about an N gang who, you know, are in my area, and they've been at war with this gang from Rayners Lane for quite a while. And you're right to say it's a very sophisticated. I mean, one of the cases they tracked down somebody all the way to Telford in the Midlands and killed him. Still haven't been caught for it. But I'm especially, we've heard anecdotal evidence on the ground, especially in the racecourse estate, which is bordering Harrow, that, you know, there is an issue that we're right on the border with Harrow, and that you know, the fact that the BCU is 3 boroughs but doesn't include Harrow, and can you reassure me that there is, you know, good, I don't even know which BCU Harrow is part of, but, you know, how closely are you working on gangs intelligence or things like that?
I'll start with the gangs question. And so my apologies, I didn't realise you were a journalist, so thank you very much. I didn't realise. Cool. I didn't realise you're from Northolt either. So I'm actually really pleased you've asked the question. You'll probably also understand why I'm not going to go into detail. I have to be frank, because I won't. But I can reassure you, we don't just work alone, and we do work with all of our neighbouring BCUs right across the board and closely. I can't comment, I won't comment on intelligence for all sorts of reasons, but rest assured, we do work very closely and will continue to do so. And you'll forgive me as well if I don't comment on particular gangs at this time, notwithstanding the harm that they are called, but we do know, and we do work very much monitoring closely the gangs, including those that you have mentioned and others as well. And we are very closely into those gangs. And some of this work, this is no secret, some of this work includes undertaking regular visits to gang members and known gang members. Some is on a weekly basis, some is on a monthly basis, depending on the level of risk that we feel that they pose either to themselves or to others. Your other question about advice to women and girls, do you want?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't, you know, we shouldn't have to say to people that they can't walk in particular areas. I think what we need to do is look at those areas where people don't feel safe and see how we improve them. So, you know, we shouldn't be giving advice, or don't go there, it's no-go area. I think we need to face what makes people think that way, that they don't feel safe walking through it, and then working with the partners, and looking at what we can do as police. You know, how do we make that a safe area so people do have that confidence to go through there? So, you know, some of those measures I've talked about are aimed at trying to do that. I think, you know, there are some inherent issues which are very difficult to overcome in some places, but I think there's a lot more we can do around that. And, you know, some of that is, if people do want to go out and socialise, you know, people need to feel free to do that as well, in whichever way they see fit. And, you know, our view from police side is, how do we create the right environment to make it safe for people to do that in the way that they want? So, you know, there's a number of areas, as you say, where people don't feel safe. And again, you know, there'll be some short-term wins which we can do to improve that. Some of those areas will be long-term issues. But, you know, our advice is people shouldn't feel unsafe. And we want to work with the public and the partners to make sure that is the case in those sort of locations.
I think there are some practical things that we obviously do need to think about, such as panic attack alarms, such as, you know, choosing one's route, etc. Because sometimes, you know, sometimes one does have to be prudent, etc. We do work in partnership to keep our parks and our areas safe. Sometimes we do also need to exercise a bit of caution, whether it's certain times of day or certain areas, etc. And occasionally, whether we like to choose areas where there is lighting, etc. And there are a number of different pieces of advice that are available. I'm sure our local ward officers can assist there if you're thinking of any individual cases.
Just I could clarify about the Harrow issue. I didn't make it very clear also that one of the issues apparently is that even though it's right up on the boundaries, if there's a 999 call or whatever, does that come into your BCU, and does it have to be somebody within the borough where there could be somebody from Harrow who's much closer, but it has to be an Ealing BCU that responds to it? Patrol.
Because can I just add to that? Because I read in the report, obviously, about changes to the stations that I can't say that somewhere about the patrol base moving to Southall Police Station 2022 has a negative impact on the east part of the borough. Now, I literally live on the border with Shepherd's Bush. So similar situation in what Chris is saying. How's the response rate?
So if I can start with Harrow, and then if I can then move on to what's essentially going to be the Met's estate strategy. So if I've just understood your question, it is about if there is a call, obviously into the north of the borough, you feel that somebody's going to be closer at Harrow. So the way it works within the BCU, so every single borough has a response team and a response site which they operate out of. What would normally happen is, particularly if it's a 999 call, and I've headed up a call centre, 999 call centre back in 2012, 2013. If there is no one available, so essentially primacy for answering to that call will be a Harrow unit. If no unit is available for any other reason, they will ask for the other two boroughs, which will be Barnet or Brent. Let's stay with our Harrow example. If they're not available, they will then put it over to the West Area BCU units, depending on the gravity and the nature of the call. So, for example, if it's a firearms call or a call for serious violence or something like that, then it would not only be either a BCU unit, there'll be a territorial support group unit or an armed response vehicle or otherwise. In other words, the Met is a huge organisation of 45,000 people, 32,000 police officers. It is never just down to the 3, 4, 5, 6 cars that come out of one patrol base. Depending on the gravity and the nature and the seriousness of the call will depend on what we send to it. We also have the Violent Crime Task Force, and we have a number of different operational capabilities that will assist with that call. Some are pan-London, some are BCU based. Your question about the estate strategy. So,
well, it's partly around responses in a similar way. I think that's part where it was.
It's a fair question. So the Southall Police Station is earmarked for disposal. I'm so sorry. Ealing Police Station is earmarked for disposal. I'm so sorry. I'm losing my. Southall Police Station is not, and is currently being refurbished.
Southall Council is free.
Rest assured, we're coming to Southall. We'll become Southall, and I'll be spending part of my time operating out of Southall as well. So in short, the response team will move to Southall. Acton Police Station is also part of the state strategy and is remaining open. Acton Police Station is now what I call an investigative hub. All of my investigative assets, with a few exceptions, but virtually all of it now across the 3 boroughs, the BCUs, is all housed in Acton, and that is everything from public protection to our local investigations. Why? Because we have the custody there, and it is pointless having officers travelling to other parts of the of a BCU when they're so having custody and investigators all co-located is the best way we do it, and that's whether it's volume crime or robberies or burglaries or otherwise. So we're not abandoning you. And we're not abandoning Ealing Broadway as such. And certainly there is quite a significant asset, albeit Acton is not a response site. It is a front counter site. Ealing is not a front counter, hasn't been a front counter for a while. Southall will be the response site. And that is the way the Met's estate strategy. These decisions were taken a long time ago. And it was a choice between whether we lost buildings or we lost officers, because we all work to a budget. And very simply, officers achieve our delivery and the safety of our communities. And therefore, in terms of saving some of the MOPAC money, we did have to look very closely at our estate. The other thing to think about is our estate, not all of it is fit for purpose. Police stations were designed, some of our police stations, let's be frank, were designed in Victorian times. Well, modern policing does not reflect Victorian type operations, I have to be frank. And so we've had to modernise, and that is true, I think, of any company. Thank you.
Super, I did miss, and I'm really terrible, but two women in the room, actually, I called up some time ago, and I'm really sorry. So I'm going to go Louise first, and then Councillor Miriam Rice.
So I'm just checking, am I allowed to ask questions that, like related to the kind of Safer Women survey now? Yeah, it's because, you were trying to do it in sections, but it's kind of gone off piece now. So I suppose I'm presuming that you've got or had some kind of insight into the Safer Ealing for Women survey. And I think kind of what's come out of that is around the lack of confidence women have in reporting certain issues. In turn, you guys have also presented the fact that the statistics have now gone up with kind of sexual and violent crime specifically against women and girls. And I suppose the two kind of do tally in a sense. So I suppose as a woman in the borough, what kind of reassurance do we have about the actions that are being taken on that, and kind of making it, number one, easier for women to report and be confident that it's actually going to be taken seriously and dealt with, and also how we're going to feel safer within our own community. Granted, I think Chris mentioned around women not being able to just walk through a park. I mean, that's an ingrained in society issue, rather than the police can't tackle that as an issue alone. So I recognise that, but there are specifics in your power that you've got to enable some kind of relative safety and also reporting and how that works. And again, the conviction rate, it's all of those things kind of linked in.
Thank you. There's a lot in that question, actually, from thank you for conviction rates to feelings of safety, relative safety, and if I've understood right, sorry, I forgot your name. I'm so sorry.
It was Councillor Louise Brett.
And of course, encouraging to report. The number of ways one can read those statistics. Is there an increase in confidence in reporting? It's number one. A lot of the reports that we look at are historic. They're historic because I think there has been an increase in confidence in reporting. If we're not talking about, many of the things that I read on a daily basis actually will have happened either 6 months, years ago, 2, 3, 4 years ago. And to put some context around that example, it's not uncommon for officers to arrive at a domestic, a scene of a domestic, could be quite nasty or otherwise, and then at that point, will the victim turn around and say, actually, I have to tell you, over the years or whatever, he has been sexually abusing me, etc., etc., etc. And we get it whether it's from point of view of children or whether we get it from the point of view, within domestic, between partners. I'm absolutely adamant, and I will absolutely give you my pledge on this. When somebody reports a sexual offence of any sort, we take it absolutely seriously. And I will absolutely hold any officer to account who does not, but we take it seriously, and we treat it seriously, and we investigate it. And it will be investigated properly. There are trying to get it into court, and you're absolutely right, Councillor, in terms of our conviction rate. I have to be frank, it does not reflect well at the moment, and this is right across the UK. There are a number of reports that have been done now, and Scrutiny, I believe there has been some recent discussion between policing, the National Police Chief Council, and the Crown Prosecution Service around how we can collectively improve those rates. What I'm not going to do, because some of those discussions were quite interesting, I'm not going to bring those discussions out here now. But there is national work going on at the moment to improve the conviction rate, the charge and the conviction rate for rape. I have to be frank, those rates are not good. They do not reflect well. But what is also clear to me, the level of scrutiny and requirements now in order to secure a rape charge and subsequent conviction is immense, and notwithstanding the timescales and some of the issues that I mentioned earlier. There is a lot of profile that has now been attributed to the whole piece around women's safety and sexual abuse and sexual offences. That is going to continue. Why? Because I absolutely want those who feel that they have been victims, those who have been victims, and those who have felt previously that they do not have the confidence to report. I want you to have the confidence to report because it is important. It's important for 2 or 3 reasons. Firstly, the perpetrators will never have done it for the first time, and it will not be the last time. I absolutely need them to feel, and the reassurance I want to give you all, and I'm very happy to go public on this, that everything, when you do report it, when it is reported by a victim, there we do treat it, and we will treat it seriously. But I'm not, what I'm going to say around this as well is that it is a long process in order to ensure that we obtain the best evidence possible to make sure we get the best conviction possible, and we work through that case. But it is complex. It is one of the most complex areas of investigation.
So, just in addition to that, we did roll out domestic violence training to frontline officers last year as well to try and improve how we dealt with those type of incidents and also the victims of domestic violence as well. So that is something which we've tried to invest in to improve the response and try and make people more confident that we'll deal with things in the right way. In addition to what Chief Superintendent Wilson was saying as well. I think also a bit like I found when I was out on the streets. I think more officers on the streets will potentially encourage reporting as well. I think the ease and access to police officers, particularly as we increase female officers within the organisation, will again hopefully encourage people that we are there and we can support them through that. And obviously around how we work with charities around victim care and victim support, I think, that is one area which we are working to improve on as well, together with how we deal with cases. So I think, there's a lot of work going on, but there's obviously a lot more to do.
I think that one is. Oh, thank you, Chair. So if I can just offer a couple of examples. The first one would be from about 20 years ago. I was walking down a street at 4 o'clock, and in this, it's obviously in bright sunlight, just down a residential street, and I saw a woman across the road, and a man came up behind her and put his arms around her to basically try and mug her or attack her in some way. I got very angry about it, and so I ran across the road screaming. I pulled my umbrella out, started waving it, and I was about to hit him over the head with the umbrella to try and help her. But then the man, I think he just took one look at me, terrified him, and he ran off. I don't think he could quite handle this woman just screaming at him. But I told people about the experience afterwards, and they just told me that I was stupid to do that I was stupid to put myself at risk, and I shouldn't have got involved. And one thing that has made me think about over the years is that we do a lot of discussion about street lighting, but to me, it doesn't matter to me how light it is. This was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It doesn't matter how bright it is. If you get attacked, no one is going to help you because nobody thinks it's a sensible thing to do. So that does actually just, that's something that has actually lived with me since. And also another experience was 30 years ago, is that my sister had a best friend, and at that time, there was a serial rapist, because this is where we lived in Milton Keynes. There was a serial rapist, and one of the first victims was my sister's best friend, and she would have been about 13 or 14 at the time. And I just remember it really well because I think she just found my sister nearby, and my sister took her to the police station and helped her deal with the whole situation, which was incredible for my sister to do. So I'm very proud of her for doing that. But then what happened is that the police at the time, they decided to tackle the situation of a serial rapist once there were more victims by telling the women that they had to have some kind of curfew, that women should stay in after a certain time at night. And then, of course, a lot of women just said, no, it surely should be the men who stay in at night. That's the way to keep us safe. So that's another experience that also has lived with me. And so I was looking in the report, it talks about things like the Men and Masculinities programme, and also what you said, Officer, about working with boys and men and working with attitudes. So I'm just wondering what more we can actually do to work with men in order to change the way things are, because basically we need to have a whole root and branch change of society. I think that's the only way to make women safe. It doesn't matter about street lighting, anything like that. In the end of the day, we've just got to re-educate and to change the way that we do things and attitudes that we have. So I'm just wondering to learn a little bit more about the work that you do with men and what more we can actually learn from that. Maybe some kind of recommendation that we could do, work with the men and change the way we do things in the borough. Thank you.
There is an awful lot in there. Councillor, I'm so sorry, I don't know your name. I'm so sorry. I will get to know you all. Councillor Rice, thank you. There is a lot in there, and I sense a number of historic incidents have probably adjusted your perception, in terms of today. So let us go to the first point around intervening. I can never say to anyone you should, and I will never say to anyone you shouldn't. What I would say is use your judgment to the best of your ability, but ensure somewhere in there that you're calling for help for people who can, because someone's life may depend on that and will depend on that. That's the simplest thing. I can never say you judge. You can say, I can never say you must always do this. You must never, because you can't. You judge it in terms of the person's safety and the safety of others. But my view is, if anything, it is 999 on the mobiles. I suspect 30 years ago, you may, the young lady may not have had a mobile. We're in a different world now. It is that, and various recording devices on mobiles, etc. So we have a lot more tools than we ever did. Working with men, that is a huge subject, and I think this is around collective. I think society, when you look at what's happening across society, you look at now what's happening around, what has influenced society. If those who remember some of the smutty type television shows of the 70s and the 80s, which I think did have an influence and bearing on society, well, society's now changed. So am I doing any direct work with men at the moment? No, we're not. It's a really interesting suggestion. Do we do that? There is work being done, obviously, those who are offenders and sex offenders, and prisons do work around that. There are, of course, awareness, and the training that our new officers and recruits are given now is all around on how we set the standards. We are very clear, and I've been very clear in all the talks that I have been given to all of my officers is around misogyny. And I've been very, very clear that if I find it happening on my command, those officers or police staff will cease to be members of the command. But in terms of what we do with people within our communities, etc., I'm not aware of any proactive work that is happening there at the moment, Councillor. Thank you.
Online, who have we got? Councillor Block. Okay, can I take the two? I haven't spoken yet. So Councillor Block, and then Councillor Rooney, and then Councillor Kamal, and then Barney Paul Driscoll's in the room as well.
Chair, I think Councillor Rooney's hand has been up longer than mine, so please let her go before me.
Okay, Sarah.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Block. It's just a follow-up to Councillor Brett's question about the survey results. I was just wondering whether you'd be able to provide some examples or more information, please, on the measures that have been introduced locally by the police to improve women's safety in the borough.
Yeah, I suppose that's where some things which I briefed in earlier around increasing patrols in areas where we know sexual violence and assaults happen. So there's been significant investment in that and a number of resources put into that as well. As part of that piece, we were given some significant funding for problem-orientated policing. So some of that went towards additional patrols, but also CCTV cameras as well, just to increase our visibility within those locations. Obviously, the Street Safe and the Walk and Talk initiatives are designed to address those aspects as well. We'll also, increase our visibility around violence generally, which obviously has a crossover impact. So we've done a lot more activity around things like transport hubs. So Ealing Broadway, for example, we've had knife archers out there. We've had search dogs as well, just to increase our visibility to make people sort of, if they're coming to there to commit crime, commit assaults, that they know that police are there. So again, that's a very good way of increasing our visibility. I think, in terms of licensed premises, we are looking at those as well and speaking with licensed premises about making sure that they try and maintain the behaviour of people within those areas. And, that would be an ongoing piece for us. The rollout of the Ask Angela initiative across those licensed premises as well. So that's what gives you a bit of flavour, I suppose, around some of the activities we're doing. Obviously, as I stated earlier, it's around also making sure that offenders that are out there, we arrest. So that's why we've got the priority offender units, which have been an investment locally. So we've got Sergeant and 6 PCs that go out actively looking for known offenders, so we can bring them in as soon as possible. And also looking at GPS tagging as well for individuals. So I think that offender management piece is very key to for those persistent offenders to, again, make it safe for females in the locality. And I say, in terms of uplifting resources across our investigation work as well, making sure that when we do make arrests or when we're trying to find offenders, that those are successful investigations and court cases. Again, just to make sure that offenders are brought to justice and keep them off the streets.
Okay, Sarah, or do you want to follow up?
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Councillor Faylock.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to raise 2 points. One was going back to the stop and search, and you mentioned, there's a perception of disproportionality. I think we're beyond that now. I think that, like you mentioned yourself, the McPherson report came out decades ago, which raised the problem of institutional racism. But we had last year Cressida Dick, in fact, saying that systemic racism doesn't exist. So I think in terms of perception of the police and how much the public can trust them is that to acknowledge that there is a problem, and that has to come from the top, as well as locally. We know that Black people are much more likely to be stopped for stop and search for drugs use, when we know that actually they're a lot less likely to be using the drugs. Just as an example. So I think we do have to acknowledge that there is a problem here, and there is racism involved, whether you want to call it systemic or institutionalized, or that we know Cressida Dick doesn't want to call it that. The second point that I wanted to raise is about domestic violence, and I'm very glad to hear that it's being taken seriously and that you're wanting to help. And it's very sad to see the increase in the last year. One of the things that we know is that women, when they leave their abusive partners, their risk of being murdered increases than if they stayed. And so it has to be taken seriously, and a lot of support has to be given there. So I hope that you're working with partners, but also looking to the government because for support in terms of financially, to be able to provide that support that vulnerable women and children very dearly need. Thank you.
Yeah, just come to the first issue around the police. I think, we'd be silly to not to acknowledge that some of the behaviour we've seen, in recent cases that have been in the media, just aren't acceptable. There has been the use of racist language, and we acknowledge that as a force that we need to improve significantly around those issues to identify those officers that don't hold the values which we would want to promote and have those sort of people in our organisation. I think in the Macpherson report, coming back to that, in the counter-corruption report that came out 2 weeks ago, which was following the review around the Daniel Morgan case, I think, one thing around the investigation side, and, I think one of the accusations was that racist attitudes were involved in the failures in the Stephen Lawrence case. When you move a few years forward and look at the Damilola case, I think within that report, it does acknowledge that the police response to that incident was very much improved. Doesn't mean we still haven't made mistakes or dealt with things, incorrectly since that time. But I think from that perspective, I think that is a sign that the Metropolitan Police has improved a lot from where we were. But we are acknowledging that we do have problem officers within the force. Some of those have obviously come to light in the media stories that we've seen. But we are looking to, or have improved our vetting processes. So we have got an increased investment in trying to identify officers when they're entering the organisation that might hold inappropriate views and aren't the sort of person we want to be joining us. And some of that work will be done around officers that are already within the force as well. Hence, some of that work around declarable associations, business interests. It's all there just so we can focus a bit more on the officers and have those conversations with them. And again, it comes back to supervisors, identifying those individuals and challenging in the appropriate way, and using those enhancements we've made within our professional standards teams to make sure that officers that display unacceptable behaviours, views, leave the organisation where necessary.
Just addressing the domestic abuse, your point about domestic abuse, the risk of murder increases, being murdered increases if you leave the partners. I think I'll just have to accept what you say. I've not seen the statistics around it. If there are statistics around it, I'd be very keen to look at them. I don't have the exact stats around that. We do work very closely as a partnership around the DA cases, around the support we give victims when they move away from their partners, etc. There's a lot of work that goes into that, and we try to do our absolute utmost to make sure that they are safe. Thank you.
Sorry, can I just ask just on domestic abuse? I know I was bit in the report about this as well, and I'm thinking about the data, because your team collects data as well, Paul. To what extent is that shared, and do you pick up intelligence and also for housing services?
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll see in the report itself, I think there's both the police data that's included in there, and then further down the report, there's the specific DA Marek data as well, which is obviously our multi-agency risk assessment conference, which the police attend, happens every 3 weeks. And it's a 2-day conference at the moment, given the high level of cases that are referred through there. What you will see from the domestic abuse data is a general trend for increased numbers in terms of increased reporting, but an overall reduction of the total rate of those offences being relating to serious violence or violence with injury. So it's seen as a general positive trend overall, and that trend has been pretty consistent for the past 8 to 9 years when it's been monitored in that way. So you see, I'll try and take you to the right graph if I can find it. Sorry, I should know off the top of my head. If you bear with me, sorry, because I believe it's towards the top of the report within, sorry. So it will just be within either the safeguarding section or the domestic figures, which I can just find for you. 2 seconds. You got it there, Maxine, by any chance? Here we go. It is, yeah. Figure 7 in your report, thank you, is probably the key one to go for. And you'll see there's been that continued trend.
For that, sorry.
I'm sorry.
The page reference.
Oh, sorry, Councillor. So it's figure 7 on page 16 of the report. Apologies. So if you look at that, it gives you what is effectively, theoretically, the most desirable trend you would hope to see, which is the total number of abuse cases increasing. Domestic abuse, that means the detections are increasing, but the proportion of those that involve a violence with injury, as a general rule, going down. That picks up a similar trend that is a London-wide trend. It is data that the Met Police have directly shared with us, and we crunch that data in with how it feeds back into our domestic abuse MARIC. There's a lot more information about the domestic abuse MARIC later in the report, which comes within the chapter around violence against women and girls. I'll be happy to discuss that as we move forward as well.
Right, I am conscious of time. We've done quite a lot here, but I've now got two people, the last two people in this room. So I've got Councillor Driscoll and then Councillor Woodruff, and I know Councillor Kamal's online as well. So.
Thanks, Chair. I think I've got 3 main points. First, in the report, it gives a clear statement of commitment to local ward-based policing, which was great. And it was great to read that you've got a very low vacancy rate for ward-based officers and the DWO officers, which was great. But it was interesting, your comments about the personnel, the staffing, the officers deliver the performance. So the idea in reflecting on that in terms of resources. So, I mean, my ward used to have a dedicated ward-based office, but that's gone. But there's no, that was presumably as a move towards that funding going into officers rather than bricks and mortar. So that's the direction of travel where we are now. And that's where you see your performance being led by that investment in officers rather than bricks and mortar. So that was interesting to hear there. The street safe and the walk and talk, which was good to hear about, but this is my first meeting where I've heard about that. And I had several casework issues that came up last year, but I never had that referred onto me. So I know that it says in the report that Acton was the initial starting point of the walk and talk. Is that now borough-wide? Has it got a wider network? Because that would have been useful to use in my own ward in casework at that point as a tool to start investigate some issues further. And same with the street safe. Because I hadn't heard of that before, and I could see that tying up with our the recent survey, but it's just not come to light prior to this meeting. So I wonder how wide it's known in the wider public, and it's been touched on already. But looking at the sanction detection rate, how Ealing is above the national average, but there's this continuing consistent decline in that. So it's not a blip, it's a consistent decline. And why is that a consistency? And what can be done to address that and arrest that decline? Because there's a small increase in that detection rate and action, but it went up and then down again, and there was a reference to that being with the pandemic as well, allowing that rise and then fall. So how is it going to be addressed, that long-term trend? Because it's not a positive trend to have end there. Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of walk and talk and street safe, they did start, well, street safe started before Christmas, so it's still relatively new in terms of bedding. I think these things do take quite a few months, don't they, to gain traction, and hence why we brief them into these partner meetings. So yourselves as councillors can hopefully, when you speak with your the people you represent, you can sort of promote these initiatives with them. I think there's more we can do with the local authority and via our own social media to promote these things. So for International Women's Day, for Walk and Talk, we did tweet out quite a lot of messages around that as well. So I think there's more to do to just build up momentum around both street safe and walk and talk, and any support you can offer around that will be greatly appreciated. I think, you know, in terms of the sanction detections, I think again, you know, some of those increases in our teams that deal with the domestic violence and sexual offences. So, you know, we've had that investment of 12 PCs within those, across those two teams, and then corresponding supervisors as well, is there to try and increase our sanction detection rates. And again, some of that is around the work with the CPS to make sure that, you know, we know what the requirements are to try and meet the standards which they set around those as well. So there is a lot of work to try and go into to improve that. And some of that also is around frontline officers, and hence the DA training, which we did last year with all the frontline officers, is there to sort of get the evidence, you know, when we actually turn up to domestic violence incidents, or incidents where sexual violence has been used, that we gather the evidence at a very early stage and we don't miss any opportunities. And that, hopefully, from our perspective, will start increasing sanction detection rates, along with some other measures which we'll obviously be working on.
I think just further to that, we've had Operation Vesper, which has seen an uplift of officers on to deal with the rape and serious sexual offences. I'm now replicating that with Operation Matin, which is going to be doing the same thing with domestic abuse investigations, and that's to support the administrative side of the investigations. And two things I see happening out of that: one, it expedites those investigations, move them forward a lot more quickly, and at the same time, it allows the officer, the main officer in the case, to take a much better oversight. So I envisage that we will start to improve on our sanction detection rate. Recently, we have seen an upturn in the sanction detection rate over the last 3 to 4 months since we've started to have that focus. And Operation Matin will go live next month.
Good. Thank you. The subject, it's sort of not too far from what we've been talking about. It's hate crime in general. I know there's lots of concern about it. Last night I was at the West London Equality Centre where they were talking about it as well. I think I know some boroughs have a plan of how to deal with it. I know the Mayor of London's trying to set up a victim service, a London-wide victim service about it. But it seems to me that this is something there's an increasing amount of concern about, you know, wider, so many groups, and particularly the victims about it. And we just urge to sort of have some sort of overall plan about what the police and the council as well is going to do about it. Do you have a plan to do that? I would, if not, I would urge you to come up with a sort of plan that we can all have a look at and respond to it over the time. And I'm told that there are a number of people who would help with the publicity, delivering leaflets if you were going to do it. Thank you.
So yes, we do. And the sanction detection rate for hate crime has improved, has increased. We have a hate crime intervention panel, which is overseen by the detective superintendent. And within our MIST team, my investigation support teams, unlike other parts, we have a dedicated unit that deals with hate crime. So that is collectively dealt with there, because that way we've got the supervision in there as well. So hate crime, so one, we take it seriously. And that's the plans. And of course, we do work closely with partners with things that need referring into partnerships, and that is done. But we have seen, as a consequence of that work, we have seen improvement in our sanction detection rate.
We do have a hate crime officer as well that supports that activity and works with. They sit within the partnership side, and they've done a lot of work over the last year or so around engaging with underrepresented groups, religious communities, around hate crime, trying to encourage people to report it rather than hide it as well. I'm not saying that counts for all the increases, but definitely we've put some effort into making sure those people that may be subject to hate crimes know how to report them and support them to do so. And that includes police officers as well that may be subject to hate crime from members of the public as well. So there is an element of supporting that and encouraging people to come forward to report those incidents. And we'd obviously continue to do that, and gives us a better picture of what's really happening out there as well.
Just a small point on that, which Anthony's alluded to. It's not only police officers, whether it's security staff, people working in institutions, any form of authority. It's amazing how many of them are subject to hate or racist or some form of racist or homophobic abuse. And I've been frankly appalled at what I've seen. And of course we do. So it's interesting when we look at the proportion of the statistics, how many of them have either been security guards, work on the buses, etc., how much they actually get subject to. And my intuition is not nearly as much as reported as it should be.
Thank you, Councillor Kamara. You got the last question on this round?
Yeah, no, my question is right from the beginning. But anyway, you mentioned car burglaries are down, but car break-ins are on the increase. And although our excellent SNT have been patrolling, the residents are terribly frustrated that despite reporting, getting, the crime reference number and everything, they get a letter a few days later from the police saying, well, since no one was hurt, the matter is closed. And the damages to these cars in several roads has been in thousands of pounds. So, the lack of confidence comes up here. That's one thing. The other is what I'd like to see is visiting the recent project, an SNB MOPEC funded project, which was for under 10s. I mean, it was so impressive that the range of questions that the children asked, I mean, there were about 60 or 70 questions that they filled in, which are going into Lee Ballard to sort of through the SNB to actually address. But I'd like to see what can be done. Maybe this can go in recommendations, but what could be done in increasing children's confidence, because they were concerned about anything from knife crime, and there were lots of questions on that, and also on missing persons, which they misunderstood as kidnapping. So, I had all these young girls asking, say, so how can we be safe and how can we walk on the streets? And these are children aged 7 and 9. And there were 5 questions on that. So I explained the whole thing to them, because I said, where is this coming from? Because I don't believe that, that's happening here in Ealing. And they said, we see these posters showing people who've gone, who've been kidnapped. I said, so I explained the difference between missing and kidnapping. But I think that the range of questions that came through from that young group of children, there were about 15 of them, I'd like to see something done in that direction as well. I know that you've got dedicated officers that are in high schools and that liaise with young people, but I think that it's the under 10s that also.
Okay, Councillor Kamara. Well, I think we got the essence of that. Thank you.
After an hour, I hope that you did.
All right, thanks for the question. That's appreciated. And I know you've been waiting for a while. So in terms of working with children at primary school level, so those that are 10 or under, or just 11 and under, we are actively already engaging with schools, primary schools, to deliver a package around that. So acknowledging that, when they go to secondary school, sometimes they can be launched into that harsher world very quickly and have to grow up very quickly. So we are trying to get into as many primary schools as possible, where we do talk about knife crime, gangs, potential exploitation issues as well. We're also looking to trial a new program around that, and I've got to do some work to deconflict that, which is something which our Commander Hidari, is looking to try and pilot across a number of different areas, which will look to achieve something similar, I believe. So definitely, and I've breathed this into listening circles and other engagement opportunities which I've had over the last few months. Very much we want to increase how we engage with younger children, recognising that we are finding that younger children are taking knives to schools and are being subject to exploitation as well, and try and give them the confidence to report any issues, approaches or inappropriate behaviour to police, teachers, or their parents as well. So it's very much on our radar. So, and I think, we're in the same line of thinking with yourself around those issues. So definitely we're already doing stuff, but we just want to build on where we are regarding that as well.
In answer to your question about vehicle crime, so yes, I can absolutely see how vehicle crime and people breaking into, offenders breaking into vehicles will undermine confidence. One of the difficulties with vehicle crime is we're not always able to get the forensic opportunities that we can obtain from something like a burglary, from burglary offences. So I'm sorry that the residents who have had the letters stating that it's not going to be proceeded with, if there aren't forensic opportunities, that it can be quite difficult to progress if there aren't any CCTV opportunities. Officers, I'm hoping, would have already made inquiries into that. But in essence, when I look at where we are with the priorities, so if we're not able to investigate, then the officers will reluctantly have to close that investigation, because it then frees them up to deal with the violence investigations.
Right, thank you. Thank you everybody for your questions, and thank both Sean and Anthony for your contributions and bearing with us, and thank you for Ben for bearing with us about time as well. Sorry, there's a lot covered there. I'm not going to summarise any of it at this stage, but we'll come back with a couple of points about recommendations, because you said you might offer to talk about the policing model at some point. The BCU, but more in the context if it's working, I think as well. That's the important thing.
Yeah, very happy.
I think it'd be important for us. Yes.
I'm sorry, Chair. We normally take the recommendations in stages so that the police can hear the recommendations that would affect their service now, and then we'll do the other ones, any fire recommendations and any community service recommendations in their sections of the meeting.
Daniel, I think that's what I'm doing now.
Oh, my apologies. Sorry.
It's okay. All right. You just thinking about the work you're doing around building trust with the communities, the plan around that. I mean, that would be useful for us to share. But working with this, you also made an offer about section 60. Engagement with
or just stop and search.
Yes, I mean, you might want to go through Paul's office at some point, how that might work in terms of invitation to councillors to go out on visits. I think communication around the boundary changes, being clear on when that's going to happen, I think that's the important thing that's going to happen. Chris, it's a recommendation, is it not a question?
Just a couple of suggestions for recommendations. Yeah. One is on street safe, which I think everybody agrees sounds like a really good idea, but very few people seem to know about it. I just wonder whether we could maybe put up signs in some of the parks, tell people, do you feel safe here? If not, contact, how people can contact street safe, because we're ignorant about it and we're councillors. And the other one was about the point that Councillor Rice made about, work with men and also young men, teenage boys, etc.
Yeah.
There needs to be a lot more. It's not really necessarily entirely the police's responsibility, but within schools, colleges, pubs, even anywhere that men congregate, there needs to be more talk about calling out other men for their behaviour and addressing issues.
Yeah. Okay. You can make a note of that. Poor guy's not watching his football team on telly tonight. I think the other thing was if you could share the details of your stride plan about recruitment, the success you have about recruitment from different communities, I think would be important as well. I think Dan Crawford, you got your hand up still?
I have, but Councillor Charles was before me.
Okay, I can't. Okay, that's fine. I can't. Go on.
Sorry, my recommendation was just building on what you mentioned, Chair. So having a broader sort of tracking demographic change in the police and actually communicating that to more broadly. So if it's in reports like this in future scrutiny panels, just so we get a sense of what that change is within the institution, and just generally having more indicators in place where you guys, how you're communicating, how you're tackling internal institutional changes, and not to mention the difficult words, the structural racism, etc. Like actually having targets in place of what's happening and measuring the impact of these internal processes. I think having some sort of inclusion of that in future reports would be useful.
Okay, thank you. And Dan?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The two recommendations from me are, and I may be preempting you, Chair, in which case I apologise, in regards to the regularity and frequency of a report back to this panel, given what colleagues have discussed with regard to a number of issues that are upcoming in the summer and further forward, whether we would look at a report back from the police within the next 6 months, for instance, rather than waiting to the end of the next municipal year. And then the other one was specifically around the violence against women and girls that my fellow councillors have described, and whether we can ask for, specifically in that update provided by the police, some information to be provided about progress of the initiatives that police colleagues have spoken about this evening, and some details of data with regard to the success or otherwise of those programmes that the officers have spoken about this evening. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. And Praveen?
Thank you. My suggestion would be, like, if the police could actually go with maybe the local councillors in the ethnic worship places and actually meet up with the community in those places. So the ethnic worship places are a good place to actually build the differences and the bridges of the understanding. So that would be a good point to actually communicate with the ethnic minorities.
Go on, Chris.
Yeah, I would bear in mind that not everybody, not every Black and Asian person is particularly religious, and for those agnostics here and atheists, we should bear them in mind.
Well, let's not have a debate about faith.
But my point was about the issue of recruitment of people from Black and Asian groups, particularly. I think we need to have some sort of recommendation, not just recruiting them, but also retaining them. I know personally a Black woman who joined the police and later left because she just didn't feel, she fitted in. She, not necessarily racism, but a sort of an unspoken cliquiness, which, she didn't feel. So we know if people do join, they need to, they need to be made feel welcome within the force, and things may have changed since that time.
So one thing I was saying we'll cover in greater depth later is policing. This is one thing to be made to feel welcome, and we make everyone feel welcome as much as we can, the teamwork, the ethic, the leadership, and it all contributes. But understand one thing in policing, it absolutely absorbs every single part of your life. It becomes a vocation.
Job being a councillor.
In short. And we do have people who leave, and I personally have them come to see me, each and every one of them. And often it is because the demands on the personal sacrifices in policing are huge. It does have a very high divorce rate. We've tried to work hard around, in terms of shift patterns, etc., accommodating, because we have a lot of single parents now, etc. But never underestimate the amounts that it takes up and these sudden changes and last minute changes that happen to officers, whether they've got 1 year's service in or 29 years service in, and it doesn't matter what rank you're at. And I can honestly say in 31 years of policing, no 2 days have ever been the same. And I think I've just about roughly tried to start at the same hours recently, but it doesn't always happen. I could be on the 5:20 train, or depending on what time I got to bed the previous night, I'll be on the 9 o'clock train. But it's absolutely absorbs you. Some people do leave for all sorts of reasons, and some of them financial. And we do look at that, and we do an awful lot of, rationale around why people leave. Interestingly, we don't do any surveys around why people join, but we do an awful lot around why people leave. Thank you.
I'll leave it there. I've got lots of recommendations there. Well, I think what we'll do is sort out the wording on these recommendations. We'll share it. Obviously, got one more meeting to come, but I think the important thing Councillor Crawford said was about bringing some of this information back to us before next year's meeting. I think, put down a marker to have overview and scrutiny next year to see what data come forward, because we can't interrogate data until we've seen some as well. So there has to be a starting point. So rather than waiting next year. So I'll leave it on that point, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much indeed.
Obviously, welcome to stay, although it's very cold. Appreciate it.
I'll be back in quite early tomorrow morning.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. Sorry, it's taken quite a long time on that item, but it's clearly a very important issue. But I'm going to move on to Ben Moore from the London Fire Brigade. You didn't get paged, did you? No.
I did, but that's fine. Good evening all. I'm conscious of the time, so I will be brief. I'll run through some of the briefest of headlines and then performance delivery from last year. I will note that the timing of the report and the statistics being put together, some may appear to be a little bit confusing because of fiscal year and calendar year timelines and comparison of data. So, but I'll run through the absolute briefing. So overall, number of incidents attended for last year was slightly up on previous years, and this is a like comparison over the 2 COVID years. Effectively, we've yet to see a sort of return to normality as with the police as well in terms of our sort of response, but that is definitely most hopeful for the coming year. On the headline figures, I say the incidents attended are slightly up, but pleasing to note that all fires, obviously the main reason why, in terms of safety aspects, in terms of injuries or serious injuries to members of the public, is down. Conversely, dwelling fires, obviously where the majority of people may come to injury, is slightly up on previous years. The reduction in all fires is attributed to certain elements, but particularly secondary fire reduction. The difference between primary and secondary fire, primary fires is effectively insurable loss. Secondary fires would be not classed as insurable loss, so it would be rubbish, outdoor, shrub and grassland fires. And as you would probably appreciate, that's very weather dependent and environmental factors. The previous year, a significant spike in predominantly towards the west of the borough has created some significant numbers there, as opposed to this year. What's pleasing to note in that element, though, is in terms of response to ASP potential deliberate fire reductions are quite significant over that period of time as well for this year. Another part of our significant response and the changing environment through COVID is, well, obviously during lockdown periods where people are potentially at home more, and seeing that coming out of over the last year, but it also is in terms of businesses is automatic fire alarms, particularly non-dwelling. So businesses is a significant increase, which has led to a contribution to our higher attendance rates in terms of incidents. And the remaining factor is something we class as a special service. So it's rescues or potential rescues required for members of the public that is non-fire related. So that can be anything from traffic accidents to persons in precarious positions. And significantly, some of our work with partners over the last year, we've engaged in a new process to assist London Ambulance partners for effecting entry to properties for medical interventions, say. Fire-related serious injuries are slightly down, which is pleasing to note, and that's attributed to, I think, a lot of our education and safety work that we have done. But I will caveat that with a lot of our safety work, particularly face-to-face, is done through home fire safety visits, advisory, and advising members of the public, particularly around human behaviour and behaviours. And safety within their own home. As you'll see from the numbers there, there's been significant reductions as our internal and obviously governmental legislation processes in COVID response has dramatically affected our ability to engage with members of the public within their own property, and also as an opening of fire stations and communities coming to us has been particularly difficult, and I hope to see that obviously change as we go through the coming year. Just as a sort of an update, as I said, fires are down. Primary fires are up slightly, particularly in dwelling environment, and secondary fires are significantly down. Special services are up 49% on the previous year. I'd say, but that's related to medical interventions. I can say that our response times, in terms of our core pillars of how we deliver our service in terms of prevention, protection, and response, our response times for Ealing are well below our average attendance time target for the first appliance arriving in 5 minutes 22 seconds, and a second appliance on the target of 8 minutes, arriving in 7 minutes 09 from time of call, which is particularly pleasing to note, and is a slight reduction year on year. So it's I'm pleased that that's maintained as obviously less lockdowns and more traffic is about. So moving forward through the year, we, similar to the colleagues in Met Police, we look forward to our publication and consultation and engagement with more of the communities through our community risk management plan, which is effectively our integrated risk management plan of how we as London Fire Brigade are going to deliver a service across London, and within that, and more localised structure within Ealing. And through that process, what we will be doing is engaging more. They're based on pillars of engaging more with the communities that we serve, and actually asking the question: what does the community, or what do the communities we serve actually want from us in our response and our delivery? So engaging and learning more from the communities, and completing our action plans from such things as the Grenfell inquiry and the Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire Services outcome reports that they've just completed the second visit, and we await the outcome response from that, and they'll all be involved in our community risk management plan in terms of our delivery and attending to those stresses. In addition to that, I'm pleased to announce that the process is starting away for the cultural review, our internal cultural review, root and branch, done, is underway and to be published in November of this year by the independent chair, Dr. Nazir Afzal. And all crews within Ealing are engaging in that processes, as we'll across London, and we'll attend to that instance too, which is a sort of root and branch review of our culture and our potentials in terms of engagement, but also in a sense representing the communities we serve, and also that factor of belonging, togetherness, and inclusion that we portray. We've also gone through and continue to do so. Obviously, is a significant piece of work in terms of training and development of managers, sort of firefighters up the way through the management chains, and our inclusion training and our leadership strategies, sort of root and branch changes over the last several years. So that's a brief look forward and a very brief cover of the statistics and performance. So I'll open up to the floor. I would like to say it's nice to see Councillor Ball after a visit to Ealing not so long ago.
Thank you, Ben. Have we got any questions for Ben? 2, 3. I'm going to start with Louise this time. I have to wait too long last time.
Yeah, right. See, the Grenfell investigation is still ongoing at the moment. But would you be able to kind of clarify kind of where the fire service is at with their recommendations for people living in blocks, specifically the higher stories? I mean, I know that there are some buildings within Ealing that do have similar cladding. So it's just kind of, you know, where are we at with that, and what are we telling residents?
Okay, so in the report, there have been some recommendations and changes, and we, as in London Fire Brigade, await the outcome of the, I believe it's still a white paper, the building safety review and the changes against, and we are still engaged heavily in the consultation on that. From the outcomes for the LFB and fire services nationally, we are responding to and attending to the potential outcomes of that. For example, we have changed our attendance responses to those types of incidents, and we have also gone through some change of recommendations and done a significant amount of training and for staff, and have changed our policies and procedures and generally our safe systems of work. So effectively our operational tactics when it comes to delivery. We've also invested and delivered new pieces of equipment and safety equipment, whether it be rescue hoods for members of the public. And you'll see in the news recently that the new fleet of aerial appliances on our long reach 64-metre ladder operations are in operation. When it comes to general advice, for those of the residents within tall buildings is that of the responsible persons. It's not for London Fire Brigade to say that. That's done by the building design and the responsible persons, so the building owners within that, in terms of the safety aspect. We do have obviously enforcement teams out and about, and we do have a significant amount of work we've done within tall buildings and our building risk reviews to ensure that with the information we hold and the inspections that are done by our inspecting teams and that of our building risk review teams is complete, and that feeds down into our operational response, so we know how to operate and how to fight fires effectively within those buildings for the safety of residents. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you for that answer. When you do kind of meet up and kind of make recommendations with these buildings, is there, I presume there's a follow-up process to ensure that whoever the kind of landlord is, so to speak, has implemented all of those, or the developer, etc.
Our inspecting officers and our regulatory, so that all sits within the regulatory reform order. On the whole, and obviously there will be some changes within how that process works within the building safety bills. Obviously we're going through that consultation process and changing that. But in terms of inspections, then the inspecting teams, and inspecting officers under the regulatory reform order will make recommendations under, and that potentially could result in notices of deficiency, and it's the responsibility of the responsible persons to attend to that, and then follow-up audits will follow in time. Yes.
Yeah, following on from that, Councillor Brett's question, can I just clarify the stay put advice is still in place for that, is still the National and London Fire Brigade advice as far as towers are concerned. I've got 3 in my ward, and also or is it sort of slightly nuanced now that if a fire were to break out and to act in a similar way to the Grenfell, where the fire was going upwards, that advice would be changed. Evacuation would be ordered earlier. And on the subject of towers, I just wondered what your opinion is of whether there should be annual fire drills for tower blocks. I mean, I know I've worked in quite a few buildings where, like BBC buildings, where they had, I think it's more than annual, they had quite regular fire drills to leave those buildings, but there's no such thing for residential buildings. Especially, some of these buildings are quite, there's quite a turnover of residents. Do you think it would be a good idea, for something, either, if not annual, some sort of regular fire drills so that people knew exactly what they should do in the event of a fire, etc., etc.
Okay, thank you for the question. I can't answer it. No, not being from there at all. It will entirely depend on each individual building and the outcome of the assessment and the risk assessment of the responsible persons and their building design as to the policy for state park. In general, on the whole, the majority of buildings are designed, residential buildings are designed around a state put policy, and we'll have engineered solutions in there to support that, and that's the way the built environment works, and effectively. In terms of evacuation strategies, again, that is the outcome of the risk assessment and the view of the responsible persons and the building design. And if there are any potential issues within that, then that strategy may change. I can't talk about specifics of genetics. That is effectively how this whole system operates. What I can say though is that in any of those changes, then we at the London Fire Brigade would be on the receiving end of information to that, and then we can change our operational response as and when and to it. And in the time of significant crisis, then we have training, and we've implemented a significant training program and changes in policies where should that, in the view of the incident commander, be required, we can do that. Does that sort of answer the question? And in terms of regular fire drills, again, that depends on the building. My opinion is that when suggesting sort of BBC buildings, that's a non-residential building, so it's slightly different, if that makes sense. So
why, a lot of office buildings, they do have regular drills, but you don't have such drills in residential buildings, which are even higher in many cases.
Maybe I'll answer that example here. I mean, we had a fire at Bromyard House about, I think, 3 years ago. As residents, we don't clock in and out. We don't clock in and out of our residential homes. You don't know who's there and who isn't there. People are working, so you can't actually, have that scenario. So
so thank you, Chair. Also, the regulatory reform model covers communal parts of the building, not necessarily individual residences, and there's the difference there. So what I would recommend is that every single property, individual property, has smoke detection within, and the recommendation is that if you are a resident of your own property and discover a fire, then is get out, stay out, and call us. But the processes of evacuation of the buildings and alarm systems may not sit within the risk assessment process or how the design is built, and the policy may be a stay put unless it's the flat that you're in, for example, that is affected. So it is a question that I can't answer because of the way the built environment works, if that makes sense. In my own opinion, and if you're in a property and you discover a fire in your property, then get out, stay out, and call us. Is that fair? Thank you very much.
Sorry, I was thinking of a different situation. Sorry. Okay, I'm going to take Councillor Crawford online first, and I'll come to you, John.
Thank you, Chair. My question is from my constituents. Actually, I've got a few weeks left as an Acton Central Councillor, as I said earlier, and several elderly constituents of mine wish to pass on their thanks to Ben and his officers for their regular fire safety visits that they've undertaken to their properties over the years. And at the other end of the age group, a number of young families would like to thank the fire brigade and fire service for allowing their children to go and interact with the fire station in Acton on the community days that you obviously held during the pandemic. I hope we can pass on the good wishes and thanks of many Acton residents to the staff and your team for their professionalism and community spirit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I will. Yes, thank you, and I hope that we can arrange more and do more in the coming year. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I was expecting the question, but perhaps an invitation to councillors and fire stations might be good as well. All right.
Of course.
I've got a councillor.
It's an open invitation.
Councillor Paul and then Praveen and Anne at the end.
Yes, well, thank you very much to Ben for his hospitality on the recent visit that he mentioned earlier on.
It's like you scripted it.
And I would recommend that there's other councillors go along as well. It was very interesting. One of the things that came up there was about lithium batteries in e-scooters. And I wondered, so the fire risks of those when they're being charged. And I wondered whether there's some work that can be done with the council in terms of informing people about those risks, particularly in terms of, you mentioned communal, if people are charging them in communal areas, in blocks of flats and so on. So yeah, I wondered if you could say a bit about the risk to let everyone know, and about whether there would be a scope for the council to pass the message on.
Yes, thank you. So yes, it is an emerging trend, is lithium-ion batteries or rechargeable batteries items, whether it be from small electrical items from phones through to your larger items like large scooters. And in terms of charging, so again, in terms of communal areas, that would again sit under the regulated form order, but the responsibility of RPs, or responsible persons, to and potentially within housing tenancy contracts, for that not to be the case, because that is effectively an escape route and would effectively conform to be some form of blockage of escape routes. So there's measures there. Having witnessed, I don't know, a scaremonger, obviously, and I can't comment on the quality of products that have been charged, but yeah, lithium batteries alight or in a runaway chemical reaction are deeply unpleasant and are becoming a source of ignition, well, so an ignition source and source of quite large escalating fires within properties in it, and it's not ideal in that scenario. So I would be very careful. I recommend that everyone be very careful and follow the manufacturer's advice. And we do have some advice on the Non-Fire Brigade website about charging of batteries and associated electronic equipment. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Chair. My question actually goes towards the purpose-built flats and the conversions. Now, I know I've seen in many conversions that there is a fire alarm, central fire alarm, but in the conversions, there's some, because it's purpose-built, there are no fire alarms. But at what stage does it change from a requirement to not being there? So, for example, some of the flats in my ward, I'm a councillor for Ealing Common, and we have some flats that are actually perhaps going to have a additional 2 floors developed. Now, when does that actually, the requirements change from it there being no requirements for us a fire alarm to it being required? After how many floors? Is it an essential, or how many flats? Thank you. Sorry, and one more question I had was on some properties I've seen when I've visited on the HMOs, that the fire extinguishers, fighting equipment has been removed. Is that at the instructions of yourselves, or because people need to be trained to use fire extinguishers, or is that a decision that management has made? Thank you.
Okay, I'll go for the second question first. In terms of hazard multiplication, again, only the communal parts there would come under the regulatory reform order, but actually we have a concordat with local authority housing, in that the licensing and inspection process will be conducted, because for the most part on HMO, the legislation would sit within a Housing Act, which is not within my remit, or not within the fire services remit or jurisdiction. So that would be not something that we would instruct. And it depends on the legislation or guidance within, say, fire safety guidance. There's a document called the cause for a house of multiple occupation. So it depends what's within that process there and what the responsible persons or landlords are doing. So I can't really answer that, the nuances of the legislation. And then again, in terms of the purpose-built flats and conversions, it depends on building regulations in terms of the requirement, what's needed, particularly when doing the conversions. Building design from inception would be in accordance with effectively two major documents, which should be in terms of the building design and documentation, would be the approval stage would be down to two separate documents. Would it be approved document B, which is under a lot amount of discussion in terms of changes and regulations, or another document would effectively contain engineered solutions. So again, it depends on the building, but and the alarm systems, but also the outcome, the risk assessments of the individuals to the responsible persons in terms of their fire safety solutions in doing that, and whether it's a state put policy or an evacuation strategy policy, and the type of building it was, if it was. So again, the complexities of that question is very, very difficult for me to answer. I would assume, I don't make the assumption that if there was an alarm system within a block of flats, I would just assume that it would probably be something like a conversion home multiple occupation type scenario. So not necessarily a purpose-built residential block of, say, 10 floors. So I, as much as I've tried to, I can't answer the question for you because of the nuances of fire safety.
So am I clear to understand that purpose-built flats really don't need, if the risk assessment says that they don't need to have a common parts to be fire?
If the risk assessment, yeah, and the building design, what the design brief is as to what the strategy would be. For example, if there was a state put strategy, it wouldn't make sense to have an evacuation strategy system for a state put strategy, if that makes sense.
Okay, all right, I'm going to leave it there because others going to get bits too detailed on some of the stuff. But thanks, Ben. That's okay. I'm looking forward to my evacuation strategy tonight when I leave. You were there. Okay. Okay. So thanks, Ben, for that information. A few questions were there. Particularly stay put, I think, was a key issue there. I think that's we might want some clarity on that actually, just to when it gets updated as well, to let the members know what that position particularly is. Is there any other particular recommendations people want to think about now? What's the only time now? Go on, Chris.
This is not fire related, but not fire related, or
no. I'm thinking about this item now in relation to fire safety. Just while we can. Go on, Miriam.
Thank you. I didn't get to ask my question, but I was asking a bit about cladding, and I'm just wondering about what work we're doing. Actually, working when there's new materials coming on the market. Let's say that we're going to use for building homes. What more work can we do to actually ensure those new materials are safe? Because of course, I mean, there's materials that have been used over the past few years, which we thought were safe, but turn out not to be. Certainly in the building where I live, we're in that similar situation where obviously the building was only built like 12 years ago, but now we know that some of the materials are not safe. So how can we ensure that the new buildings we're building, at the council especially, so many new homes that we're developing, and how can we be sure in the future that they're all going to be perfectly safe to live in, and we're not going to have these extreme issues as were thrown up by the Grenfell disaster? And what work can we do in order to ensure that we are working probably with the government on that?
I was hoping it's a recommendation.
Yes, that's why I'm saying it's a recommendation. It was a case of what I mean, we're just looking at the work that we're doing in order to ensure materials are safe. I'm just looking at what work we can do on that.
Very, very briefly, is the more sort of building regulation, building design, BRE, building RE regulation standards that and government legislation would sit there, and British standards, effectively, that's where it sits. It doesn't sit within the fire service. But what I can say is, if we identify trends through our fire investigation teams, such as our sort of media campaign on white goods, where we identify particular elements of household appliances that's a danger, where we can effect change, and our total recalls products, where we identified certain products of white goods within kitchens had potential issues in terms of ignitions, then we've successfully lobbied for changes in that environment. So there are things that we can do, but not prior to inception, design and build, if that makes sense.
And John, you had a final recommendation?
Yeah, so I was wondering if we could make a recommendation to our housing function and also private sector housing team in terms of the issues about the lithium, things like e-scooters, lithium battery charging in communal areas, so to try to ensure that that's one of the factors that they take into account on inspections and so on. They know that it's on the radar. I'm not sure it is on the radar at the moment in terms of when they do state inspections and the inspections of HMOs and so on.
Okay, I'm getting quizzical looks behind you, so is this a way you can just clarify what you meant? Just be clear in simple words.
So can we recommend that housing look at the implications of what we've heard about lithium-ion battery charging in communal areas within council housing and private sector?
Think about that one. I think we take that one away. I think what that means in terms of service.
Yeah, we can definitely. I think as a recommendation, there's nothing unsound about it. It might not be one for the crime and disorder panel, but I appreciate we always confuse things by having London Fire Brigade at this panel. But I'll definitely take it back and maybe feedback within a week or so once I've got a bit of a steer. That's okay. Whether it sits with this panel or maybe something different. Thanks.
Okay, Ben. Thank you very much for turning up today and for your patience. You weren't interrogated as much as the previous two. So, that's okay. All right, people. I know, given the time, unfortunately, Maxine is very cold. She's had to leave. So, Paul, it's up to you how you want to play this last bit. I think you'll basically do the rest of the report.
Thank you, Chair. What I was going to propose to do was not to talk at you at this point, because you've got the report. I'm sure you've got questions. Maximise user time towards questions. And a real apology for Maxine. She came here specifically to present two quick things to you. One was around the violence reduction plan, feedback we've had from MOPAC today, which is very positive, and also the Spaces panel that she does as part of that. But key, she wanted to do a quick presentation on the Safe Reading for Women project. I appreciate that she hasn't had time to do that this evening. So it's my apologies as well for not maybe thinking things through in terms of time management. But Maxine has offered, and it was always our intention to offer this as well, not to come back and present to you specifically as a scrutiny panel on that. If it would be helpful, we could do an extraordinary meeting of it. We could do it informally, however, but it's the feedback from that panel and what we intend, from the survey and what we intend to do with it, because the engagement was really impressive. And I think it demonstrated that we were really crying out for a survey like that and for a conversation like that to start. So that was the offer there, really. But I think it might be the most appropriate thing just to move forward with questions if you're happy with that, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions any of you might have on the report.
No, I'm happy with that. I'll just, I'm certainly the offer brief, and I think it's an important issue, and I think whether it comes back to this meeting or as a briefing, we can work it out what the committee wants to do. I'll just quickly give the section by section very quickly. So in the report, it's Safer Communities team, which is Paul and his team. If you have any other questions, particularly around that at this stage, Paul?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think it's table 18 on page 29. So it shows an increase of 42%, but essentially that's in 4 areas, but with a change from 20 to 21. So I just know what's prompting those. I mean, they're kind of overlapping: harassment, violence, hates. There's a bit of a Venn diagram there of overlapping issues. That was the first point in this section. And the second point is figure 21, page 31. So the diagram there shows 29, 30, and 19, 20 and 21 years. But is 2021, is that a return to almost normal? And the previous years reflecting the pandemic? I mean, because there's a shift in the actions that are taken with more community protection warnings and notices happening in 21. I'm just wondering, is that a change of policy, a change of appropriateness in response to change different behaviours and responses? What's the driver there in that different shift, and less closure notices as we go further, more recent times as well? So I'm just trying to understand that change in action.
Yeah, absolutely. They're really good questions that are picked up on the data, so I'm pleased about that. In relation first to the overall increase you've seen in cases from 2020 to 21, the biggest increase, 182%, obviously is in that inquiry section. And the reason for that is a change of internal policy from our perspective. What we've tried to drive over the last year or so is capturing any person that contacts our service. Obviously, we have a 24/7 service to the extent that we are an ongoing service, because we manage the CCTV control room at the end of the day. So we consider ourselves to some extent a 24/7 service, but we are just a 9 to 5 service during the day, if you can do. But any inquiry that comes through to us, generally speaking, is going to have a resident who wants to tell us something. They might not actually want a case to be opened with us. They might not say, this is my problem. It might not even be an issue that the team can actively investigate, but it's still evidence we want to capture. So it's almost like intelligence that we want to capture that resident's experience, if you like. That explains the increase in the inquiries. I think the increase in terms of harassment and particularly the violence related matters is probably more to do with sensitivity by officers in terms of appropriately flagging some of those cases as violence related. But I also think there has genuinely been, as we've moved from 2020 into 2021, coming out of lockdown, I think we're seeing people move back into a space where they're encountering each other more. Residents' disputes did somewhat spill over after lockdown rather than during lockdown, which was interesting, because that's what we were expecting 2 years ago when we did our first online scrutiny. We were expecting it's going to be a really tough year from resident disputes perspective. The feedback seems to be we got more resident disputes spilling out, certainly into a space where they were contacting the local authority after lockdown. In terms of the enforcement that we do, it's absolutely right. Although we've continued to increase our enforcement, we're using a lot more CPWs these days. Community protection warnings, community protection notices are almost like mini injunctions. They don't actually involve a court decision. The community protection warning itself is an initial step that you take before you issue a community protection notice. They can contain the same conditions and prohibitions as an injunction might have. The difference being that the recourse that you normally take is prosecution in a magistrate's court or fixed penalty notice, rather than going through a committal proceedings in the county court. We still do quite a lot of injunctions, and I suspect that we will continue to increase the number of injunctions next year. I'd be surprised if we stuck at the middle ground that we are at the moment. The reason that we've had fewer injunctions at this point, I think, number one, generally speaking, we did hit a bit of a peak of using injunctions, a little bit like maybe 5 years previously, you sort of hit a peak with ASBOs in terms of the people that you wanted to get on those orders are now on those orders, or you have dealt with the behaviours. And also, I think the courts are more robustly challenging some of those as well. And you really want to make sure you have a very strong case before you go to court. The other issue we had, and we can't deny it during lockdown, is the courts have been very tricky for us to get into. Yes, they set up virtual hearings, but getting more complex matters heard, getting trials, particularly for people that are robustly defending their injunction proceedings and things like that, has been a real challenge. And getting into court has been problematic for us. There's no two ways about it. So that explains, I think, in part, some of the dip you've seen around that. What I will say about closure orders, I think that there generally has been a downward trend on us using them. What I will note, I think with the data this year, I've included all of the closure orders that we as a service, as a council, have obtained. Haven't necessarily accounted for all of the police-led closure orders, and I know the police have upped their game somewhat around applying for those closure orders, particularly with the BCU model. But it is a fair point. There has been a general trend down on things like closure orders and injunctions, and a general tick upwards in CPW, CPNs, and also housing-related powers around possession orders and things like that.
I'm moving on to the next section, which is notes. Same one, crime reduction prevention. Any questions around that section? Okay, Ealing Council Regulatory Services. Oh, sorry. I'll bring you in a second, Paul. Councillor Dan?
Hello, Chair. Sorry, you may have skipped past the point where I wanted to ask a question. Can I still?
Yeah, please do.
Thank you. So just a couple, if I can do noise and nuisance now. Sorry if I'm out of order, Paul.
No, that's fine.
I'm often accused of being out of order. The report talks about how we've changed our approach slightly in terms of how we previously have done noise nuisance in the past traditionally as the council. Can I just ask you to comment on the effectiveness of that, and that we're presumably going to continue with that approach going forward at the moment, and what you see as the challenges for the service? Because I get a lot of feedback about noise and nuisance from constituents, particularly in this period where everyone had been at home.
No, thanks for the question. So yes, the model has changed. We've moved into, so the out of hours response service is now provided by, it's actually Park Guard that provide it, and they deliver the patrol service. What it's allowed for us to do is to bring the officers in the noise and nuisance team into the cluster model. So they now have the same cluster arrangements as the Safe Communities team. So they have go-to officers in the same way that Safe Communities do. So they can go to their specific police teams, and they have the same relationships with those ward officers and the cluster officers as the Safe Communities arrangements do. Does offer us quite a lot of benefits in that. What you have seen is an increase in the use of non-Environmental Protection Act powers that those officers are using. Environmental Protection Act 1990 is what we work in within noise nuisance quite a lot. Yes, it's good legislation, but it's very, very tricky to enforce in a domestic setting. Often with commercial, it's actually, particularly for commercial types of noises and for issues that are pure noise, yes, you can deal with them through the EPA, but when you're dealing with behaviours, it's quite difficult. So if you're talking about, for example, noise that might be occurring in a premises because of the people's behaviour, shouting at each other, playing music at unsociable times, actually getting it to the point that you've had it witnessed, assessed, is it a statutory nuisance? Has it happened a sufficient number of times? Are you then going to go ahead and issue a noise abatement notice and enforce that noise abatement notice? It can be a very long and protracted process when you could, for example, serve that person with a community protection warning, when you could consider an injunction application, when you could look at maybe doing some work around tenancy, when you could do something much earlier than that, intervention, mediation, and things like that. So from that perspective, I think it's more creative and it's more effective. What we are seeing is the out of hours call times are far better in terms of how quickly the response is happening. Generally speaking, if you call the noise and nuisance team, our commitment was always that our officer will call you back within an hour. We're seeing on a good night, you're getting residents getting called back within minutes, 3, 4, 5 minutes, and even at the busy weekends, they are getting callbacks within 15, 20 minutes. We're not always able, still at weekends, it's a challenge, Friday and Saturday night party patrol, to get to residents in all cases, and we have to try to triage and manage cases where we think the worst examples of noise disturbance are happening, particularly cases which might be repeat cases, because a significant number of cases that we get are one-off calls where we don't actually have a repeat of the noise disturbance. But yeah, a real push our end has been around trying to focus on the behaviours and that drive the noise rather than purely the noise itself. because you tackle those behaviours, you get a much better, number one, it's much quicker to solve the problem. And number two, it generally is much more sustaining because you're not just going after the symptom, you're actually dealing with the cause, if that makes sense. So it is a model that we're continuing to develop, and certainly there's no plans to change it. Hope that helps.
It does, thank you. And then I've got one on licensing. I don't know if we've reached that point yet, Chair.
Just ask it.
Okay, thank you. Just in terms of licensing and inspecting premises that are applying for new licenses or premises that are already that already have a license. I know the report talks about the licenses we've revoked and the conditions we've imposed. Obviously, there's been a huge challenge for officers in this period where there's been a lockdown and yet premises have been open, and that's really impacted upon the demands on the service. Can you comment on how well we've performed in terms of upholding our statutory duties, and what you see again as the challenges for the service going through perhaps another uncertain period where we're going to go back to pretty much normal, it seems?
Good question. I'm going to caution my answer by saying that obviously I don't manage regulatory services, and I don't technically manage that part of the police partnership or anything like that. However, but I'll talk from what our team's experiences of witnessing that. What I would say is that during lockdown itself, we were able to tap into some funding for COVID stewards who were supplied to us and worked very closely with regulatory services. We had a lot of officers pulling together in regulatory services and doing multidisciplinary work they wouldn't normally do. So food safety officers stepping up and doing a little bit of work with licensing, trading standards, getting involved in as well, and COVID stewards being part of that, going in and effectively checking which premises were open that shouldn't be, and making sure suitable warnings were given and fines were being issued where appropriate. As what I would say around in terms of the challenges with licensing, I think that we do struggle. I think the biggest struggle, and I don't want to get, I could talk a lot about this, but is with unregulated premises that actually don't have a license or aren't involved in licensable activity. So I'm talking about premises that might be open at 2 o'clock in the morning, but aren't technically involved in licensable activity. They can be really challenging. Places that are providing, for example, cold food that might be to take away. There are businesses that might be involved in non-legal activity, criminal activity even, or be a place where people who commit criminal activity go. But by virtue of the fact that there isn't a licensable activity taking place, we really struggle with the licensing team. And I think sometimes it almost lets the right enforcement teams off the hook, because the police licensing team rightly say, well, this isn't licensable, so we genuinely can't deal with it. But there's not necessarily, and I know the police aren't here, I don't want to stitch them up where they're not, but the police don't necessarily say they will deal with it either, because they don't see it necessarily as criminal. And yet anybody who is in there, we know these businesses we talk about, we see them, we might be concerned about the activities they're involved in. They seem to trade at unusual hours, or they seem to not sell very much, but seem to be open a lot of the time. So that, I think, is a big challenge for us moving forward. And we're looking at what we can do between community safety and regulatory services with Joe Blanchard to it's not even about being creative, it's just about understanding, are we doing everything we can to regulate these businesses? Are they complying with the basic minimum that you would expect businesses to comply with? Because there's lots of other tools other than licensing when it comes to that. So those are the sorts of businesses that we are focused on. What I will say is that the licensing team have always been incredibly responsive when we've needed them to look at an issue that genuinely is a licensed premises related issue. And they have been very good about working with us on a couple of initiatives, not least the safeguarding pilot that we pulled together last year around specific targeted work to increase both safeguarding awareness, but also increase in safeguarding practices as requirements of the license. And that's something that I want to explore a bit more this year as well, in terms of what we can do about putting specific conditions in place around those licensed premises that would have safeguarding requirements on them. But as I say, licensing is not an area that I feel, as you can probably tell, that is not my expertise, but also it's not an area that I manage. So I don't necessarily want to speak for in that respect, but I hope it sort of gives you an overview of the work we do with them.
Yeah, so I think it's the gaps between is kind of what I was driving at, Paul, where the legislation doesn't cover some of the activities that are going on. So there may be a recommendation, or at least something that could be updated, because the licensing committee wouldn't have purview to look into the kind of instances that you and I are referring to here, and it may fall through the gaps of sort of the council's scrutiny functions to probe some of those issues. But I'll defer to the chair.
Thank you, Daniel. I mean, think about the wording on that recommendation. I'll come back to you at the end. Paul.
In regulatory services, just about food inspections, I mean, there's about 2,000 interventions and about 160 actions for non-compliance. I don't know if that's a sign of good, because there's no benchmark with how other boroughs have the number of interventions, the number of compliance, and the number of prosecutions is very small. But should we be grateful because the intermediate interventions worked? So I'm just trying to get a sense of how effective that service is with 2,000 interventions, but 8% actions, and maybe it's working well, and that's a product of that. So just trying to get that right in my own head.
Sure. Again, I'll talk anecdotally about it, if that's all right, rather, because it's not a service that I manage, but I will give you some examples. I know Ealing has a very, very high number of food premises, and it has a very high number of independent food premises as well. And that can be particularly challenging because you're not dealing with the same company. You're dealing with lots of different managers and lots of different types of companies as well. So I honestly don't know in terms of benchmarking, in terms of the proportionality, in terms of you looking at how many interventions versus the enforcement, and particularly going as far as prosecutions. I don't really know what that looks like compared to others, but I do know that Ealing generally comes in for quite a rough ride when the annual report comes out and is published about the number of unhygienic premises that it's identified, whereas actually that for me is quite a good measure, because Ealing is identifying high numbers of non-compliant premises and taking appropriate action in most of those cases. There was
Can you answer that, Paul? Sorry,
sure.
I should point out, General Purposes Committee does get that annual report, so I don't want them to go into detail tonight. So I don't know, I was at that meeting as well, so you might get some responses for some of the answers from that as well.
All I'd add on it was there was a bit on ITV last night which featured Ealing food safety, if you didn't see it. And I must say, I thought our food safety officers, who we do work with, came across incredibly well on that piece. It is worth checking out.
Usually council the housing officers come off work in these documentaries. Right, okay. On the sections going back, I've got, I know we partly covered this, tackling male violence against women and girls. If there's any other questions in relation to that? No, I had a couple of questions. Sorry, there was reference made to the Safe Ealing for Women, the survey. Been quoting it, but when's the results coming out?
So I can provide a little bit of, we presented to Councillor Riles on this. Was it just yesterday? Seems like a long time ago. It was just yesterday that we did a brief presentation to Councillor Riles and to a couple of key colleagues on the results from that. We're pulling together a report on the findings from that, and a number of recommendations that officers will be making. Some of the data as well will be presented and analysed. There were, as I say, once you factor in the number of pin drops that we've got on the map and areas that we've identified and the people that responded, you've definitely got over 4,000 individual respondents to this survey. The overwhelming majority being women. You've probably got a few men who've answered it, and we've probably had a few nasty comments in there as well. But actually the overwhelming majority of it is from women who live in the borough or work in the borough, and have provided some really interesting, in some cases quite harrowing stories of experiences that they've had. It's a huge piece of work that we now have to pull together to do it justice to the contributions that we've had. Where we're sort of looking at is towards the tail end of April. We hope to have a draft report ready, and we will be publishing this internally, sharing it with members It will obviously be shared with us, the Safe Reading Partnership as well as a report to that, and looking at what realistic, going into May, realistic measures and recommendations we can put forward, because it's touched upon earlier. Sometimes it's an immediate thing that we jump to, that maybe we just need street lighting somewhere, or maybe we just need CCTV, and those things can all be really useful in certain areas. But a lot of it, I think, is around how do we fundamentally change the conversations that are happening out there, and also what we're doing about male behaviours, which forms a huge part of it. But those recommendations will all come out of the feedback from the survey.
Okay, I mean, it would be useful for us to see, I think, in the committee.
There's also an ask from a lot of the women who took part, was that they wanted to know publicly what the findings were and how we could sort of use our best way to express that and to let them know. So we're currently working with comms on that as well, to try and find a strategy going forward to sort of put out the information that we've got. And perhaps even kind of link it up with Street Safe and other things that are going on, which are similar, to build on what we already have.
Any more questions around that section? These other ones, areas I'm not sure. Ealing Community Marac, Ealing Mediation Services, Integrated Youth Services, we covered young people earlier on, to the police bit as well. Contextual safeguarding in Ealing, and drug and alcohol services in Ealing as well. Any questions around that? No one? Is anyone online? And public safety CCTV. No? Okay. My only question was that is when the contract's been awarded.
The contract,
consultancy contract.
The consultancy contract, is this the consult? Sorry, I'll have to go through the. Is it not? It's not in the.
Get back to me. That's
sure.
all right. Get back to
me.
No problem. It's all right. Park and Estates with Charles. Any questions on that? I think that's it. I think we've kind of done the document. All right. Look, thank you, Paul. Obviously, thank the other visitors as well for turning up, and to Councillor Wells.
Sorry, Chair. Could I just, sorry, it's Councillor Block. Could I just ask a question about drugs and safeguarding in relation to, you know, what happened with Child Q? You know, one thing that really struck me was, you know, the duty of care of the educational institution, because when I was at university, you know, I remember fellow students being caught with drugs. One, in fact, got caught dealing drugs, and the police were never involved. The university kind of, you know, dealt with it all internally for the benefit of the student. These were white students, I might add. And yet here we had, you know, these were above 18. Here we have you know, young child, you know, somebody under 18. So, you know, just that we as a council, you know, are talking to our schools and about our duty of care of safeguarding our students, especially, you know, if there are any kind of concerns about whether they're carrying drugs or anything else.
If that's so, it's a question about the conversations that we're having with our schools primarily. I'm thinking I don't. I'm obviously I'll just be cautious again with saying that. See, I don't manage that area, but I do know that the communication. I don't know the Hackney case well enough. I don't know what their relationship it was like with the local police teams. I do think it's. I don't understand how what happened in that case happened. It seems completely inexplicable. There's a whole range of people who've behaved in that situation in a way that probably to them even now doesn't make sense when they look back at it. Whether it made sense at the time or how they justified the decision making they were making at the time, I honestly don't know. I won't pass judgment on them because I don't know what the situation in its entirety was, but it's an inexplicable situation. Why I hope that could never happen in Ealing is, number one, being reassured to some extent from assurances we've had from the police, which is they've understood that that search should never have taken place in the first, it should never have happened. And that is recognised, not just at a senior level, but I hear that from operational conversations I'm having with colleagues all the time. I also know that the relationship between our education, social services, our social services and integrated youth services and police is genuinely joined up in Ealing. I think problems like this do get picked up, not just at the strategic level at the SEP, they get picked up in the sort of weekly contact that we're having. I mean, every Tuesday at the moment, all of those services are together in the same virtual room around the weekly serious youth violence call, for example. Every month, the MAVES, which is the multi-agency violence and exploitation panel, which involves representatives from all of those agencies, but in particular from police and education, get together and at that sort of operational management level. So it's not just I hope, I really am very confident that situation could not occur in Ealing. I don't want to disparage any professionals who are involved in what happened in Hackney, because I'm sure in some cases they're decent professionals who thought for some reason they were doing the right thing. How that situation came out, it should never have happened. And I do feel confident that it couldn't ever happen in Ealing. And I hope we're proven right on that, because I don't think a situation like that should ever happen again anyway.
Okay, just to say, obviously we had the reassurance from the Chief Superintendent earlier on. I mean, we can bump up the recommendations to make sure what steps they're taking to prevent that, such an incident happening over here.
Yeah. But I think there was a duty of the school as well. So that was, why I wanted to raise that with Paul, because the school and the council had a role, I think, within that, as well as the police doing that. I think the teacher in the first instance perhaps wasn't correct in her actions, or his actions, the teacher involved. Sorry, Chair.
Okay, I'm probably not going to have a conversation about this now. Okay, I'm going to just remind you, any recommendations, the rest of the report, anyone want to suggest anything? Diana Crawford, you did say one earlier on, didn't you? Is he there?
Well, Chair, yeah, I did, just around...
licensing, wasn't it?
It was, but it's about how we capture some of that information that doesn't go anywhere else, in theory. I don't even think it would go to General Purposes Committee. But Paul and Sam can help with liaising, possibly on the precise wording. We can work that later.
Okay, yeah, it will come back to us to approve it anyway, so we'll clarify exactly what that is. So if there's no other recommendation, actually, Chris Summers.
Well, it's just about stop and search, and we need more progress on that data, and also I need to sort of go back to the Racial Equality Commission and clarify what exactly but they were told that the stop and search criteria, basically the way it was done was being changed to try to get rid of this inherent bias, this that's led to this figures we're getting. And I need to get more clarification, but I could read it in, get back to you with a recommendation.
So Sam, that was about stop and search. So we just needed more details on the progress they're going to make towards it and evidence of their unconscious bias training. That's what the Equality Commission was recommended at the time, the culture of them and us. So, so thanks for reminding me of that one. All right, I think we're done. Almost. So all that leaves me to say is thank you very much. Thank you for bearing up us tonight. I think it was important because it is, given the focus on the police service over the last year, that we do our bit as well to hold them to account. So thank you very much. So next meeting we've got is scheduled to take place on 28th of April 2022, 7 days before a certain E-Day. Of course, that's going to be the last meeting of this municipal term and the last meeting for several members of the committee. Some will be planned exits, others maybe not. So on that point, can I wish you all a good night? Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks for that, Hitesh. Good night.